Galantes. It is my pleasure to be here with you guys today and to have someone before me who I've been wanting to introduce to you guys for a very long time. Mark Wilcox. He's one of the guys, the team. We're going to learn more about this phenomenon called 21E8. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for being with us. And, 21E8 has been something that has captivated my imagination, my mind. And I'm the first one to admit that I'm one of those that really saw a lot of wonder in it, and I want to learn more about it. What is 21E8?
We've had several kind of like periods that we've gone through. Really like the best sort of tagline I always go back to is we're the magic number company. So what is it and who are we and whatnot? Sort of like you can pretty much answer it relatively completely. I've been saying that since about 2020 when we were really getting started. Yeah, in that tagline, it leads you to another question: is what is a magic number? But also, there's sort of like lots of other magic number companies around now. So I think we can maybe kind of go into that and that'll help paint a bigger picture about sort of what we're trying to do and where things are heading. And yeah.
There's a lot of very interesting um, origin stories regarding Bitcoin and regarding the Bitcoin infrastructure. And for example, I've read that that Satoshi um, launched Bitcoin in a way that mirrored the 7 days of God's creation, as seen in the book of Genesis. Do you know about that? Is there something you can speak to that?
Um, I can't say like I don't know particularly what you might be referring to where someone said that, but it was something I think around like when I first met Andrew DeSantis, when I became friends with Andrew, that was sort of like you quickly start learning and identifying the similarities, right?
Right.
And it has this very sort of like interesting kind of layered approach, and you find your way back to the root. So 100%. I think there's some 2017 tweets from me like floating around, sort of on the with that sort of lens. And I think maybe like Craig Wright sort of picked up on that about 6 or 9 months later. I can't remember. There was definitely like a very funny video. I don't know. You could probably delete it off YouTube now of Ryan Charles, and he later sort of like was able to escape the cult of Craig Wright. So I think he that's part of why he cleaned his channel up. But there was a very much like that narrative has definitely been floating around the Bitcoin for a while.
But it's also something that is very close to not just one school of thought within Bitcoin. These things appear across all of Bitcoin. Even, the small blocker camp really sees the a lot of intentionality behind Bitcoin. And you guys were able to notice that there was a hash at the first block of Bitcoin history that read 21E8 and that had a lot of
Not
more
right
leading
at the start.
zeros.
Not right at the start,
Okay.
but it was very serendipitous in that Andrew and I were. I was actually visiting Andrew. I stayed with him for like 2 weeks in Mississippi in 2018, and I already had the 21E8 domain, and I sort of like he was selling me on this like E8 lattice ideas, and I thought that was really fun and funny. But there was a company 21E6 that he was sort of involved with, which was the biggest Bitcoin startup in the world
That was
from
the
about
21,
20.
right?
Yeah,
21.
21 they rebranded because they couldn't like
Okay.
kind of stomach the dimensionality of the original name that came out in their slide decks. So they eventually
Yeah.
like went from 21e6.com to 2021.co, and they kind of like really diluted themselves and eventually like sold themselves to Coinbase for basically just about the same money that they raised in the first place. Anyway, I
In,
thought it
in,
was really funny. I have like a habit of like buying shitposter domain names. Like I have frog.vision. You can go to frog.vision/frogvision.pdf, and it'll have like the Bitcoin white paper, except we rebranded it to say it's so instead of Satoshi, it's Coin Easy, and it's all
oh,
bright
nice.
green 2028 color.
Okay. Right
So
on.
I had a habit of doing that, and one of the domains that I had was 21e8.com because it was kind of like 21e6, except instead of paying loads of money, because like they did for the 21.co domain, it was around at the time. I was like, I'll buy that one for $20, thank you. And I put some cool reactive diffusion WebGL animation on it and like and put it on my Twitter profile and like left it for a bit. And then a year later, I was sort of at Andrew DeSantis's place in Mississippi. He was tweeting the Bitcoin Genesis block hash, and
Yeah.
we were working on like mock-ups, and we'd been timestamping tweets or from Twitter. We'd post tweets. Tag the open timestamps proof bot and then delete it. So there was this like meta game of the information market, sort of like that there's this hidden information like strategy game being played all around the internet where where you have to be able to be there at each moment to capture the data, record it, and then reconstitute it on the blockchain, right? And so we had
I
been doing that for about a year or something. And
okay.
yeah, later on, I was like at Andrew DeSantis's place, and we were working on like making a UI so that we could reconstruct all these tweets that were stored on BTC, and this is like from before the halving. But then at this point, this is sorry, not halving, the hash war, the fork. But then later on, this is like post fork, and and it just like caught the glimpse of my eye that like the latest block like had that number, and I'm like, and I was closing the tab. It was like while I'm closing the tab, and I'm like, wait, and I like reopen. I go like Command Shift T, and then reopen the tab again, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. And so I tweet it, of course. And Andrew had tweeted right before that. He'd tweeted like hashtag with the Genesis block hash. And we did that like we thought that was really funny, but it like caught on, and he stayed up all night like shit posting, like meming it, and then like 2 days later, it's like the UK Telegraph newspaper, like in futurism.com and everything, they all have these like big articles about mysterious block hash signals the return of Satoshi Nakamoto, right? So there was this sort of whole he had lots of like he'd had this meme of like or this narrative of like Satoshi Nakamoto is a time traveling alien, sent from the future and quantum computers and all this kind of stuff. And sort of that was almost like the coining of that like originally it was just this like sort of funny thing of some ideas that we had floating around with the E8 lattice and like optimal graphs and the Bitcoin network and so forth, and little like interesting things that Andrew was doing on the BTC chain as well with memory addresses. And then yeah, sort of like there was a serendipitous thing, which is like sign from the universe that you're like that you're on the right track. And then next thing you know, it's all in the news and everything. So when I was working at another company at the time, but then like sort of a year after that or something, yeah, about 12 months after that, I was sort of, hey, like I want to go work on all this, these Bitcoin sort of AI related ideas. I'd had lots of experience with like what now is this AI Nvidia supercomputing thing, and I guess I started working on that 10 years ago now. And that was just
On
sort of like
Bitcoin.
the natural, no, not on Bitcoin, just like in the AI in the Nvidia space, but then sort of like that crossed over with Bitcoin around this time. And so when I was like, hey, I really want to go start looking at and working on some of those ideas, it was sort of like the obvious name to pick for the company, because there wasn't some there was a very particular focused concept around this way that you can encode information in Bitcoin hashes, but all of the other things that you might, that might be what you need to do with that, like, well, we had to go and set out and try to answer those questions for ourselves. So I picked that name, for the company at the time, and said like, hey, let's try to recruit a bunch of people and turn this into something. And it was a bit of my bad luck that like we basically did that on the same day that the COVID sort of like virus got spawned out over the internet, and sort of like that took over. But weirdly, that was just kind of one Bitcoin halving ago, really. Like plus a year at this point, obviously. But
And
we're
that
only
was
like
after
one
a
one
very
cycle
big
past
Bitcoin
that.
conference in London as
It,
well.
Yeah. And
And
there were
so,
a bunch of us, of us were all there. That was like
yeah.
right before all the lockdowns and stuff started.
So
Yeah.
what a lot of us theorize at the moment it happened is we because at the time we were at Anarchapulco and we said this whole lockdown is happening to stop the 2018 guys. That's literally what a lot of us said across the world in Acapulco, Mexico. That's where like there's just too much energy coming from that conference.
Yeah. There's definitely when you kind of go well, like when you look in history of sort of like Einstein and different people, like they're inventing the same things at the same time. I think there's like the information environment has like encoded in it, potential energies that they only just become possible, like within a certain window, and there's a high chance that like somebody might be like 5 minutes behind you. So it was very sort of interesting seeing all these sort of like ARG type of techniques, like from the mainstream media, that like basically 6 months after that, like we were going around London, like taking pictures of things and like hashing them and tagging them and everything, and having these ideas about how you can use proof of work to like classify and index and associate information. Well, it was very interesting to see like 6 months later, mainstream, I guess it was like maybe a bit more like 12 months, but they would, like your iPhone would have the cryptographic context tracing thing that it spits out hashes so that if you go to the grocery store and you don't necessarily like keep away from everybody else's Bluetooth antennas, like at the distance that they tell you in the news, then there's a random lottery chance that you're going to have to stay home for 2 weeks. So
Oh,
it's
that
very
sucks.
interesting, like sort of from our perspective, going like, oh shit, like we had perfect timing, but we had no fucking clue, like, what was coming down the pipeline, and we got like stuck in New Zealand for the first 2 years of trying to do everything, and so most of the last cycle was basically that first half, and then the entire sort of like correction from that, where it's sort of like it went from uh, everything being completely locked down. You're not allowed to go anywhere or go or do anything or associate with anybody, and like don't look the right, like careful what way that you look when you walk across the street or something. To just 100% like full throttle, with all this Elon and X and Trump and everything, like in the second half of it. So the whole last cycle is basically just purely dominated by this, like this COVID years, and then like the Elon thing is the correction and from that. And that's why I sort of made this thing about like, well, we're not the only magic number company anymore. Is that now you have this interesting, funny Doge thing, which there's a lot of like the playbook that of new tricks and new things and new ways of thinking that were invented in the last cycle that Elon is off, like putting through the US government at the moment, particularly about like putting, assessing transactions and auditing the treasury and putting classification codes on things, and my suspicion is it's going to lead to a lot of assessment and like things that would lead to like multi-sig on government and agency, work and so forth. And there was a lot of that we were quite keen to get into, but honestly, like we spent most of this last cycle on this kind of information problem, like what's the information environment, how do you understand, how to interpret what you're seeing and so forth. Because it was really like, the big moment was like was ChatGPT, right? So you actually sort of have like these three. There's this sort of like COVID event. There's the ChatGPT event, which is kind of like the crossover in the middle, which is when it's like, hey, all the uh, all the all the all the curtains are coming down, and like now you're seeing how things are running behind the scenes, and you get everybody gets access to the technology now. So obviously, like when they were running COVID, there was people like AI generating the daily reports about this and that, and that's how they could get the sort of like coordination and synchronization and consistency. But then in the end of that is the sort of like transformation of Jack Dorsey censorship Twitter into Elon Musk X Corp Bitcoin AI Twitter, right? Where they actually managed to kind of like take both sides of the aisle where you had this sort of like AI technology that was, on one side, and basically, he managed to like convert. He managed to monetize crypto in the process of doing that, and that's part of why he's like the kingmaker. In the present moment is because he figured out how to cross over that, and he's very much a global politician in that sense as well. And there's not really many other people. You could think of it as like there's a very memorable tweet, I think, from that the what's the guy's name? I can't remember his name. It was the uh MakerDAO founder guy who went
Yes,
crazy.
I
But he has a
remember.
tweet that's like, we in the Klaus Schwab
Vladimir
versus Craig Wright
Nikolai. Yeah,
timeline. Yeah, yeah. And so the reason that Elon is the kingmaker
we
is that
are
he
again.
he
That's
managed to take Craig Wright and Klaus Schwab and like become the united person, right?
Can you
So
repeat
he
that
is the
tweet
ident.
again? You said
Yeah,
it was
it's we in
Nick.
the Klaus Schwab versus Craig Wright timeline. So both of them lost in the last cycle, but this new guy of Elon Musk, he managed to kind of like beat them both at their own game, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah,
is
I made a tweet that was like, we had Adrian Dittman down here, and I made a tweet. It was he did this Twitter space with Charlotte Fang and Nick Fuentes, and I tweeted like, we in the Charlotte Fang versus Nick Fuentes timeline, and then Adrian Dittman is trying to kind of like, like we don't need you, Nick Fuentes and Charlotte Fang anymore because I sound like Elon Musk. Yep.
there. You go. Okay, so we've talked about many things thus far, and I think in order to bring things to perspective for the viewer, um, I think it's a good moment where we need to step back and like if you could please explain to people what computational data markets are and how they are the backbone marketplace for all of computation, all of the internet, all of crypto, and now how, a lot of that computation is moving into AI. What is the computational data market?
Well, so this is like a concept that kind of like really was sort of like driving my interpretation or understanding of Bitcoin like in 2019, like late 2019 when I was starting up the project. And that was sort of like the original speculation that we were sort of like that our ambition was to run for that. That was like 5 years ago. It's still really relevant. Like the relevance of that speculation is really high now. So if you actually want, so 5 years ago, that was sort of like when that was like really, really hard to grasp. So wouldn't even resonate with people. But we were trying to kind of like not fork off, but we were trying to create very different language to then think about what is really going on here, and can we like remove the speculation and the drama and everything else, and then talk about how things are working and how they could potentially work under the hood, right? And on one side, you had these like AI algorithms and Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter, and like, the feed and the algorithm and the attention, and Bitcoin was huge on there. And you also had these sort of like historical dramas of like, the takeover of Bitcoin Talk and the takeover of our Bitcoin and the takeover of, and then Wikipedia and things in there too, but the ultimate takeover of BTC, right? And the changing of how that fits together.
Here,
So
can I say
around
one
this
thing
time, yeah.
real quick? The company 21 with Andrew DeSantis, I remember how that was one of the center points of contention in regards to the future of what Bitcoin was to evolve into. And I remember that he even had employed small blockers, which maybe he regretted at the time because he had employees at 21 who were constantly challenging his worldview of having Bitcoin involved in the pretty much, if I remember correctly, the Internet of Things, Bitcoin powering the Internet of Things. So I just wanted to bring that back to mind because that company 21, I remember it being very, it was almost like a tipping point in Bitcoin history where Andrew had a lot of momentum. And then since Bitcoin was united at that time, I don't think he expected for his own employees to
Well,
to
Andrew,
take
there
such
wasn't
a
Andrew's company. There was Balaji Srinivasan's company.
Balaji.
Andrew
There you go,
works there.
Balaji's. There
Andrew
you go.
was one of
Yes.
these, like, characters that I think that there were several of these characters. Andrew was involved in Bitcoin Magazine, and I think that's how he ended up at 21. 21 was really exciting. That attracted me a lot. The idea was essentially running REST API services over payment channels. And eventually, part of that turned into uh, um, part of that turned into um, the Lightning Network, um, right, with transacting over payment channels. But also they had a deal with Qualcomm where they were trying to put a Bitcoin mining chip into smartphones. And the head of operating systems and all the low-level stuff for Qualcomm is the founder of Solana. So I don't know like whether they were involved in that, but it's interesting to see like, well, what was happening then and where did it lead to? Their business model was essentially, and then the other thing was that they had, Mark Andreessen. It was a Mark Andreessen, like Balaji. He was like a really, fast riser working at Andreessen Horowitz. He doesn't work at Andreessen Horowitz since their exit. But what is the Mark Andreessen sort of camp now in the space? Well, it's EAC, right? So sort of what was there, still exists. That's sort of like the Silicon Valley a view, but there was already at this time there was sort of like the Silicon Valley Democrat, and then sort of like this kind of, amorphous sort of all, I wouldn't say it was a small block camp at the time, but there was the over time it ended up there. And so you could
Right.
sort of imagine that like the small block camp like took out, so it hit like Mark Andreessen around that time. But part of the reason for it was like a conflict of capital because they're taking venture capital, which is speculative capital, and then trying to mine Bitcoin with it, and then they find that they just lose all their money very quickly, right? Whereas if they just took that and did what Michael Saylor is doing, right? If they just took that money and bought Bitcoin with it, it would have worked very well for them. And I think that they still have. I think Mark Andreessen still owns a very large number of coins to this day, and that's part of why he just kind of like sits quietly on the internet and doesn't talk about too much. Um,
Okay, so
yeah,
we before I interrupted what you were saying, you were talking about that there was a point in time when in Bitcoin history where things could have gone in a direction of which you saw. You said that there was a moment of time where what you saw in Bitcoin was a take to incorporate this computational data market idea and just to move it forward as part of the Bitcoin roadmap per se
yeah.
to market strategy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was this interesting dynamic of what Bitcoin was becoming in 2017, with like starting to create these information markets with the time stamping and with Twitter events. I think that was around the time that Jack Dorsey came back to Twitter. And he was running the Stripe payment company, and he was trying to integrate those two behind the scenes. He eventually made Cash App at Twitter, and the guy who set up Cash App and run all the Bitcoin team there, like they were all in. He was buddies with us and with me and Andrew and everything, and I think he's still floating around. So there was that happening in the time, and there was like a potential for Bitcoin really to kind of like take off a bunch. This is sort of like before it did its original run to 10K, really take off and become this sort of social, like become a social network, essentially like around this time of 2017. And that kind of was what really like that amplification led to the hash war and the forks. So that actual social media sort of amplified conflict where the social media and the GitHub repos, like that wasn't secured on chain, that wasn't secured by proof of work, and it wasn't, you know, that ended up creating this event where Bitcoin desynchronized and it turned into multiple chains. A similar, like much in response to that, actually, is like, well, I came from like the kind of GPU world where like, yeah, but these things called GPUs exist and you can just like compute all the Bitcoins back together if you like. And so I started 2018 to be the hyperdimensional Bitcoin company, which is like, yeah, we know that there's these three different coins out there of like BTC and BCH and BSV. Each of them they just represent one of the properties of money. So if you get confused into like thinking that one of them is going to win against the other, you don't know what's going on. But if you know that they all run on the same standard and you can just buy and sell any of them in atomic swap and whatnot, then if you just either like hold pre-fork coins, that's the best thing to do. But if you don't do that, then just collect up a bunch of them, manage them proportionally, to their hash rate, and then great, you've just magicked up a fourth thing, which is not any of these isolated ones that are all in competition with each other. Those are more like pools. So if you imagine that there's a hash power distribution, well, maybe you want to much more outweigh it to one thing or the other. You got to look at the pricing. But essentially, we were like, hey, we can make this fourth thing. We're going to use completely different words. Doesn't sound anything like it, and we don't even care about the token. We're going to look at. There's a really like we always refer to it. This is paper. Money is memory. Which is that if you look at all of these things, like, well, first of all, they're very similar in terms of the same chain, like same networks. You can look at the behavior and how people are interacting. But you can look at that as, from a technical standpoint, as an information system, like as a social network, or a newspaper or a database or whichever other lens that you want to take and put over it. And that's part of how, by the way, like these AI ideas about, well, anything can be looked at as anything. Well, Bitcoin sort of gave you the way to think about that around this time of like 2016, 2017, 2018. So if you were in Bitcoin around that time and interacting with the AI on Twitter via the recommendation system, you were already learning these types of things that are now in the mainstream in the form of Gen AI way back then, right? And so similarly, like we were starting to think about, well, can we take those concepts and can we operationalize them so that we can create synthetic Bitcoins? So that you can go, well, I want a New Zealand Bitcoin with all these properties and everything. And it's very much like the ESG system behind BlackRock. They just run a bunch of GPUs, hold a bunch of capital, and then they make their synthetic derivative, which is like, here is like tree coin, tree dollar, right? Or whatever else that they might want to incentivize each week. And that's sort of like, in that COVID kind of period before ChatGPT came out, but where the AI was getting rolled out and it was all becoming like extremely hyper capitalized, you had a lot of this very strange identity capitalist dynamics going on because there was a certain amount of money over like you changing the color of your hair, for example. If you actually know how GPUs are deployed on Wall Street, how a lot of these like incentives and financials, like to the degree to which a US dollar, you got real value in exchange, and then you've got speculative liquid derivatives capital. If you understand that, well, every time you go do one thing, then if other people see that, then it can go viral on the internet, and somebody can spend, like, it was like the George Floyd thing with like a fake $20 note, and then it's like the Domino's meme, that turns into whatever, right? Are you following?
Dude, you blew my mind because you just made me realize that Bitcoin is not one of these coins. It's all of them. And what you're saying pretty much is that you can take a representation, a derivative of however you want to, a derivative of all three of them, and each one of them represents different aspects of Bitcoin that sit in potential that can be actualized. And yeah, you're blowing my mind because I'm realizing now that um the hash that goes into each coin is proportional to the amount of awareness that people have regarding that aspect of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I mean, in a neural network, like they call it the attention mechanism, right?
Yes, I get it. Oh,
So
wow.
100% the same like dynamic. This is like what money is and how money works. So but when I say kind of Bitcoin now, it's not really because Bitcoin got, broken up into its constituent parts. So you actually have to have a certain amount of technical expertise to know, well, how can I make a derivative that glues these things back together again, so that when I spend a little bit of BTC and a little bit of BSV and a little bit of BCH, they go back together again. And like, you know,
Wait,
um,
so you
um,
guys are working on that?
well, so this is like how I really like viewed things in 2020 and like late 2019 and 2020 is that you could see this emerging like computational data market. If you use those lenses, you could see the big picture of like what Bitcoin is and what it was becoming. And it's like a really practical way, like non-speculative now, of like, well, if you want to look at XAI and like Riot platforms in Texas, like and lots of other like and Nvidia and everything in the same market, which they were before because Nvidia was Ethereum mining, right? If you want to just look at the market now, so just a really good term to describe what is going on. And I would just sort of say like, hey, computational data market is really just like a collective term for like proof of work hashes, like you manufacture those and sell them to the Chinese, cool. NFTs, great. You do some rendering on your laptop and you put it on the blockchain and that's a computational thing and you sell it to the Chinese, cool, right? But the scope of that that scope is like been increasing. There's like that in the sort of like 2022 era, there's a lot of people talking about zero knowledge proofs. Well, a zero knowledge proof is also sort of like a computational data product, right? And there's a huge amount of things like the weather report is a computational data product because the government runs supercomputer simulations, right? And then they like put it on the news and you consume it as a media product. So the actual sort of scope of potential like applications, and I was sort of working on that, before I was in Solana. That was like my what I the speculation we were kind of running with to say here's where we think this is going to go to, and if we work on this now in 2020, then by the time 2030 like has come along, this will all have just happened, right? And we're sort of halfway through that, and it kind of it's started to happen at this point essentially. And if you at least have that, if you have gone through that period and you knew that back then that is like really practical because it can actually help you separate, like filter out the signal and the noise right now and like not get scammed. Like Sam Altman is like really bad and like he doesn't have any way of determining what's real or not when he's confronted with some like, do I spend a huge amount of money on some AI project, right? So
100%. I
like
agree.
we were a little bit ahead of it, like we were kind of late, or you say like we were started later than OpenAI, but sort of like while they were kind of lagging behind essentially, like before they made this like Transformers pivot. And I met the OpenAI guys like back in sort of 2018 or something, and we're all like whiteboarding like how much compute can fit into the entire universe. Is in the entire universe that you could potentially harness. And I was like, yeah, to mine Bitcoins, right? And right, and they were already working with Nvidia at the time, and uh, uh, but
I have a question.
yeah. So I was just gonna make a point
Sure,
on
yes.
this OpenAI thing. So around this, I think it was in early 2022 when all the stable coins were blowing up. Um, and there was sort of like there was around the time that Nvidia's I think that there was this like COVID peak in the market when then the interest rates changed and like Tesla crashed hard and Nvidia crashed hard, and everything. And this was in the lead up to them turning off all the GPUs on Ethereum. That essentially, like after they turned off all the GPUs on Ethereum, like Chat GPT came out, and so there was this very clear shift of the market as it was running with like FTX and so forth to like a very new market where things that were happening behind the scenes, where like GPUs going out there and like starting to run the economy, now like became the economy in late 2022. And in the first 2 years, sort of 2 years of yeah, business, like we were all on Nvidia. So I was sold on the Nvidia vision of like, we got GPUs and Bitcoin and everything. And part of the first 2 years of the business, just like sitting at home in New Zealand is like, well, we weren't out there in market, like, delivering product to customers and so forth. And so we just missed out on that. Like the chatbots came and like we weren't doing that at all. We had this like computational data markets thing. We were still trying to, and like nobody cared because like they don't know like the language models that they come first. And but in 2020, in late 2020, the Mac Mini came out. Like sorry, Apple Silicon came out. The first product was a development kit. Of the Mac Mini. And the other things that came out in 2020 was iPhone shipped with a LiDAR sensor in it, which I viewed that as like quite interesting at the time because it's like these points that get picked up. Think of it like a Bitcoin miner, a LiDAR scanner kind of does a similar thing. And that you can go like let's scan lots of points around and like collect up the feedback. But in between the two was the new consoles, the Xbox Series X and the PS5. And they shipped with what's called computational storage. So they shipped with the SSD and the GPU already starting to do this like computational data pipelines where the geometry and the levels and the maps they would regenerate themselves constantly. So think of it like an ASIC, like an Xbox Series X in 2020 looked to me like an ASIC for what has become Gen AI. But actually, it hasn't become that yet because it doesn't have persistent storage. So you ask an AI something and it forgets about it. You can't like use your AI and then like work on one project for like 5 years. It like forgets. It's like your file system like resets itself every 5 minutes, right? They haven't figured out how to run the memory management yet. So in 2022, uh, I think like in late 2020, I had one Mac Mini, and like the guy who did his internship on the Mac Mini, like he had a great time, and he already had a job lined up after his internship or whatever. He works at Block now, and he had an awesome time. And then like everyone who's like doing Linux development, and I would be adamant like we have to buy the shittiest, cheapest like $1,000, like PC Nvidia 1050 boxes from the PC store. Like they were miserable. And so like by the time like late 2021 came around and we had like 7 or 8 interns or something that summer, I just bought everyone a Mac Mini because I was like, this is going to be much nicer, much more standardized. Everyone can have a really good experience. They don't feel like they were fucked over because they got they picked the short straw of the intern computer. And in the end of that summer, one of the interns came to me. His name is Dylan, and he like walks into the office like one day, and he's just like, "Hey, Mark." I optimized the miner to the SHA instructions in the Mac Mini. And I had this like $17,000 super micro server like filled with Nvidia GPUs. Um, and his optimized because NVIDIA GPU doesn't have SHA instructions in it, but an ARM chip does. But until the Mac Mini came along, an ARM chip was like a crappy mobile, like Raspberry Pi type of thing. So although it was good, it still wasn't as much in practice for like giving you a certain capacity. And you wouldn't do your work on it if somebody got given like a Raspberry Pi on NVIDIA. I had lots of those NVIDIA ARM boards. They were like this big. I don't know where they are. I think somebody took them at some point. They were like kind of worthless to me after the Mac Mini. I realized, well, the Mac Mini is good enough to be a computer to the point that it's better than an Intel chip, right? And so you could say like the market didn't really kind of cotton on to like how good Nvidia was at disrupting the Intel chip until 2022. But actually, Intel got disrupted not by Nvidia, but by Apple in 2020, right? And yeah, and so Dylan, like he comes to me, and by this time this was like not the first company that I was like working with Nvidia, development kits and CUDA and shit. And there's a meme like anybody who works full time on Nvidia, they're used to running on their like Ubuntu laptop sudo apt-get purge Nvidia dash star, which is like delete every single piece of Nvidia software from my computer because it's all broken and not working again, and I need to reinstall it from scratch. That's like a regular development workflow that you always go through. And so I had spent all this money on these like loud, expensive, super micro servers and everything, and people having a miserable time on like GeForce cards and whatnot, and Yeah, and he came and told me that like, hey, this thing works, it's faster than the server. And it's like, 10.99 New Zealand dollars. So I literally just like did not buy a single new actually I did buy a couple for some like 3D people. Oh no. Yeah, no, after that, I think after that. But basically that was the end of ever using any Nvidia hardware for anything anymore because Apple is like the mortal enemy of Nvidia. But but it was faster, it was more well suited for what we were doing. And then what's interesting about the Apple Silicon was that it's a what's called an APU, which is it's a fusion of a CPU and a GPU. They share the same memory. The CPU uses the GPU memory, the GPU uses the CPU memory. So whenever you deal with anything in an NVIDIA system, you're burning electricity and creating all this lag and slowness, and the code is all high complexity because you're having to move data from the CPU to the GPU memory constantly back and forth. Right. And like this is what Adian, like he taught me like this is what the Orthodox do. We just like make sure all of the memories are like all unified memory all the time. And like the more I learned about like computer architecture, the more you go like, okay, yeah, those guys like know what's going on. They know how the computers work. And like as a backup, like if the computers like if they keep on breaking, then well, like we could just go there and talk to them and then like come
So
back
the,
and
the
figure out what
Bitcoin
needs.
monasteries entered and guided the way. Nice.
Yeah, it's like a Mac Mini is like it's a step on the way to the Bitcoin monastery, basically. If you like really want to be it's extremely power efficient, where you don't need a computer at all, that you know how to do this. But the difficulty goes up. So that's basically what happened. What we could see, and it like I said, right, that there was a sort of like era in like 2017 where Bitcoin gave you the ability to like see what was going on in the market without like relying on the mainstream news to like tell you what the state of the art is. Like they're telling you what the state of the art was like 4 or 5 years ago when you're seeing anything there, right? Because it's been
Hmm.
de-risked at that point. It's like de-risked to the point that like okay, billions of people can know about this and like no harm is gonna come to it. Whereas like anything that's actually like happening right at this moment, is much more tumultuous. You don't even just like people knowing about it and talking about it. Right. And you can see like when that goes badly like with COVID, right? Because there's like if there's a big sort of reaction and then like word gets out, then all of the second order effects of like trying to manage the public it like cause much more harm and damage than
Of course.
than 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 the underlying thing, right? But if you don't have a secured information system, then you really struggle with that.
Let's talk about that
So
right
there was
there.
so I'll just like finish that point basically that there was a sort of like information system sort of like era with like Jack Dorsey, coming back into Twitter. Eventually, Jack Dorsey ended up leaving Twitter. But in this like 2020 period, it was very much just like computational data market like concept, which is you could see that hey, the Nvidia GPU is about to become the Bitcoin miner, right? The Bitcoin, the capital market like forces behind Bitcoin for like concentrating capital and energy that's going to move to, and I was working on these like big Nvidia like supercomputers at the time, like 2017. You could not convince a single data center or enterprise data center over to put one Nvidia GPU anywhere near any enterprise data, right? So like thinking about just the transition that has made since then, is quite significant. So that was sort of like the speculation around this 2020 period. It's still kind of like a general. I try not to like put too many new ideas out there, and I'm still like cleaning up that project. So it's still a good phrase, and you can see like, well, now you can learn actually what's going on and maybe like a little bit of what's happening because of in the last 4 years, in the last halving period, the meta game moved from this like social media critical infrastructure to the computational data markets. All right. And so we're now in a next halving where, I wouldn't say like I'm not sort of like we're not running on full steam like speculation. But there was this yeah, so I was making the point about the Mac Mini. Basically, like at the start of the start of that halving period, there was sort of like this early contenders of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X because they were hardware that looked very close to the ideal sort of ASIC. What if you wanted to do what at the time was called computational storage. Now it's called Gen AI. If they opened up those platforms, then everybody wouldn't be like running expensive, broken, like overpriced super Microsoft on Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure would be out of business because the Xbox Series X development kit would have like become the Mac Mini and the H100 and taken over the whole market, right? The Xbox Series X and the PlayStation, they're locked down platforms. Literally everybody forgot those consoles even existed in the last halving because they were so caught up in all these other like, real-time events, like X.com, Twitter scrolling every day with all the events. Xbox entertainment, like really, really bad in comparison. It like, they may have had great hardware, but everybody at Microsoft was off playing the Nvidia AI game on Azure. And so I recognize like, hey, this Mac Mini thing, not only is it already just faster at doing all the stuff that I want, but all of the other GPU algorithms that we wanted to run over lots of memory, uh, you didn't have to deal with this moving data around and having like in order to have the data in host memory, you had to load the data into your CPU memory before you could load it into GPU memory, which means you have to have like for every 1 GB of GPU memory you need to have also another gigabyte of CPU memory, essentially, right? Because on a PC, you can't read data like the Xbox does, where it reads it straight off the SSD into the GPU. And even to do that on Xbox, it's a special graphics API. So you had to like load it into system RAM and then copy it into your GPU. Now, the PS5 is an APU, and both of these hardware platforms are from AMD. Um, on the PS5, how they did it without like being Microsoft and making DirectX. The PS5 operating system is a BSD operating system, so it's actually quite similar to Mac OS. It's like one of these AMD APU chips that have it's kind of like how the Intel laptops they come with a little integrated GPU, but the AMD one is like a real GPU instead of a crappy broken knockoff. So that when the Mac Mini came, well, when Apple Silicon launched, that was Apple not just shifting off of Intel, but they also had the best GPUs, in the industry, full control, like driver stack of their own, right? Like massive hyper commodity market. And exactly the form factor for the rest of the device. And it had a neural engine in there, right? So already had an AI ASIC in there alongside the SHA instructions and everything. We didn't learn later about the Thunderbolt thing, and that was just like a massive cherry on top, and sort of that really only came about maybe like not quite like 12 months, but maybe like 9 months after that. We kind of like realized that, and that had pretty significant implications in like our business plan. We ended up with like a hardware prototype form factor, whereas when we started on just the pure computational data markets view, that was like very much Bitcoin centric, looking at the information and the behaviors and the attention and the market, and then trying to work out like how you build something that takes advantage of that so that you can, essentially like run a Bitcoin miner that also captures some of that value, right? Yeah, and yeah. So I think you were going to ask something before.
Well, yeah, in terms of securing the information on these networks, I know for a while there you guys were working with using proof of work as a signaling mechanism. Is that something you guys are still working on?
That's what we're working on, but way to think about it is like like all compute and information and communication is all signaling. Okay.
Yes.
All the universe around us is all like encoding and signals. So although we tested that sort of like from the advertising, we're like, yeah, okay, our business model is going to be advertising. Got it. Great. Like I tested that like briefly, quickly. See, like, hey, that thing that we like sort of like just did at Andrew DeSantis' house in 2018 like once, and it was kind of crazy, and then like I forgot about it for a year. Maybe before we like go raise lots of money and hire lots of people, we should sort of like just double check that is actually like a technical, like reproducible, like rational thing that if we do that again, can does somebody react to it the same way that they did then, but like maybe at a micro scale. And it seemed to go pretty good. We had a bunch of people like go to 2008.com, copy paste hashes onto Twitch, which existed at this point, which like a year before, we were doing all this stuff on Twitter, but then a year afterwards, like the guys at Urban Arson and so forth, they'd like built and Urban Arson, he was actually in Mississauga Mississippi for a bit too when we found that hash. He went off from that like 6 months later that they'd found Twitch. So when I was sort of like, coming back to the community and saying like, hey, we're going to go and explore these ideas, I sort of like hashed a bunch of stuff on my laptop, posted on 2180.com, and sort of like messaged everybody. It's like, hey, can you copy paste one of those things and put it on Bitcoin? And we just did it. We did it on Twitch, right? But so today you can go back on the BSV chain. You could also anchor things with open timestamps onto BTC as well. I think like majority of all that, like BSV, like had the infrastructure. But you can go back and so people can use that as proof of like, yeah, I was a 2188 affiliate like years before there was anything that looked like a tick, on the social network, right? That's part of the reason why we could see what was going on there when that happened too.
So I see that there is a lot of excitement building around 2188 and your emphasis of what we've always dubbed the Bitcoin index, right? And creating and understanding Bitcoin and arguably all of crypto within the lens of being able to serve the computational data market through what each of these blockchains offer. I want to bring to mind what Dean Little has been working on with Project Zeus, where he has essentially created an SPV node of the Bitcoin protocol on Solana. What are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people are not talking about that, and I think that there's something there that is very special that people are missing, and I think it has to do with the fact that Solana is now giving Bitcoin um, abilities, BTC abilities that, although costly, would not have otherwise. Do you have any thoughts on that project? And do you guys see yourselves working with that in any ways with Solana?
I mean, it's essentially a Bitcoin project, right? Because he's just making Bitcoin run on another platform. What's interesting about Solana, and Solana, it's an architecture that comes from the Spanner database at Google, with an algorithm called True Time. So they're using SHA-256 like as a timestamping mechanism, not just for like big, dumb, slow timestamping of like you have a document and you want to prove that that exists, but like real-time information. So Dean going and doing that is really interesting, because you can now start to have, Bitcoin networks and Bitcoin payment channels and Bitcoin signatures, which they say this share the same hashing algorithm, but they also share the same key algorithm. So almost like Solana is one of the closest technologies out there that is like very much compatible with Bitcoin, and that's why I think that the simplicity of it is part of the reason why they're like, hey, yeah, let's make one that goes really fast and it's really big, right? Interestingly, Solana's like original pitch was to make that run on the GPU. And these were like, CUDA programmers from Facebook and Google and things like that. I'm still pretty sure that like the only Solana GPU code that sort of like plausibly is out there somewhere is like for keys or something. So they basically kind of like never got that to happen. But there was a lot of like that design that and that like in the first couple of years of this project when we were doing a lot more like Bitcoin stuff, and it really kind of became a lot more like AI focused. So like ways of encoding information as opposed to ways of in private and like under your own control, versus these sort of like more public data markets. We found really quickly that we don't have the infrastructure and the tooling and the scale to like to make that safe, and that's sort of one of the things that you would see from the big AI labs as well. They can only kind of like make that safe because, well, it doesn't have any memory, like you can't go viral in a language model. But if they made like a social network where everybody was generating things together, then that would get way too hot to handle, like way too quickly. And only Elon is the only guy who really has that, right? He's only the only guy who's like not actively like the number two is Zuck, but Zuck is sort of on this Jack Dorsey model of like still censoring lots of the information. And they've kind of like intentionally made their models crappy, and they just have like sort of like they just run the open source one. Whereas Elon is running a state of the art model on Twitter, and then it's basically a massive free for all. He's not out there really controlling the platform like Dorsey Twitter used to.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of go back in terms of infrastructure, and I want to talk about something that a lot of people in crypto don't know about, which is Urbit. Could you explain real quick what Urbit is, what that project has been proposing, and where is Urbit? Is Urbit something that has still has any legs as an ecosystem? What's going on with Urbit?
Well, like, you know how I said there was this sort of like 2016 to 2020, halving era thing around social networks? They're sort of
Yeah.
just like a legacy project from that era when like people are like, well, it can be like iCloud and Twitter. We could put iCloud and Twitter together if we like use that blockchain stuff somehow. And actually, they were around for a long time, and they had like a really great like technical capacity. They're like a software operating systems computing company. Um, but there's sort of them going and sort of like becoming an Ethereum NFT, like made their whole project very confusing. And it was unfortunate because they went from sort of this like really kind of cultish, esoteric, like make
Hmm.
the difficulty level up this high so that we can like work on something really ambitious.
Yeah.
And it eventually just got diluted. That esoteric thing that was sort of like protecting the value, it just like diluted the value until it's sort of back to, and even Curtis like is he's kind of like the only guy working on it now, right?
Hmm.
And it's similar, like he was caught up in like the similar kind of wave that, well, we may have been like trying to do the computational data markets thing, like, and didn't know that, but then AI happened, and we're like, oh shit, like we probably should have known about that. Then like it's just me sort of like piecing the works together from the last halving up back again until we're really kind of like ready to like make any new speculation on what might happen. But there's still lots of ideas and things that are not in the market that like I still have in our archives, that if that can be put in a form that like that you can have on your desk, that you can kind of like do the same thing in the mainstream. So it's like I was saying with ChatGPT, that if like that technology that Bitcoin people had in like 2020 to 2024, if a little bit of that can be made accessible by the end of this cycle to the mainstream market, then then things will go pretty good. So Urbit is very similar. There was a lot of like I went to them in like late 2019, so like before the in San Francisco, so like before the halving, and I was like, let's host Urbits and payment channels, like we can do businesses and everything. And
Right.
the guy who buddy of mine who was an engineer there at Tlon in San Francisco at the time, working on Urbit. He really put me in front of the two guys who are running it, and I said like, hey, all this like social network like fake operating system kind of stuff is like kind of lame, but like, hey, that technology you have is like we could probably make a lot of money out of it if we actually like run businesses. And then sort of like, that project was largely like destabilized by COVID stuff and in the same way as everybody else. But in 2020, Logan Allen, he went off and started the first Urbit company. And now there are actually like, a dozen or more Urbit companies. It's still a bear market. So there've been a bubble of like boom of Urbit companies, and then like a bunch of them go out of business. Right. Including Tlon doesn't really do Urbit anymore. They like made a whole foundation and things, and it's like Curtis Yarvin's job now again. But he now has he's on sort of like his second business, which is much more of like an overlap between the data markets, like computational data markets idea, and what Urbit was doing, and capabilities that like are still really interesting about their underlying technology. And so that's called the company is called Zorp.
Zorb.
Zorp
I wanted
Corp.
to ask you
Yeah,
about
yeah.
Zorb next. Yes.
But the project is Noctchain. So
Blockchain.
he's
Yes.
trying to make a Solana killer that sort of like uses a bit of proof of work, uses a bit of this kind of like ETH Urbit, like ZKP, compute contracts, logic stuff, and find a way to plug them together. And there's a really like good complement between his like zero knowledge proof technology and my hyperdimensional proof of work system. Yeah.
Okay, so for a lot of people, let me just break this down more in layman's terms. So there's this overall idea that has become a reality with the infrastructure that we have. And this idea is that we don't no longer really need these giant server farms to be the intermediaries between us, between each other when it comes to sharing our information. That the computers that are readily available to us, the public, have within them the constitutive makeup that allows us to deal with each other person to person, P2P. So Urbit has been aiming for that worldview, and it's aiming for that infrastructure. So it's kind of like having a decentralized P2P nature to computing infrastructure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much 21E8 is also aiming at that, correct?
Uh, yeah, they're related. But the thing I would make a point of is that Ethereum became an NFT on Ethereum. Oh, sorry, Urbit became an NFT on Ethereum. So it was a startup, I think from 2010 or something. They even like applied to Y Combinator. It was just a computing startup in San Francisco. Right? Like Urbit was like the name of their operating system that they were building. The company was called Tlon. And eventually they sort of like it was around 2016, all of the like Andreessen, it was like around the time of this 21 stuff. Everybody who was doing anything adjacent to decentralized computing, their VCs all, tapped them on the shoulder and said, you need to go make a coin if you want to keep getting funded. And so that happened to them and it largely like diluted. It took that like really you really needed to be like a Curtis Yarvin Nazi sort of like mentality to make sure that nobody comes along and just like inserts a little bit of JavaScript. All right. So largely they're kind of like the remnant. There's the sort of remnant of like, well, they had a token, but then all of the speculative value has been squeezed out of it and there's nothing left. So now that there's nothing left there, rather than like having to rationalize Urbit with JavaScript running on Kubernetes on Google Cloud, and wasn't this supposed to be a thing that ran on a Intel NUC thing under my couch?
Right.
You can just be like, just put it on it. Like their business incentive is that they don't have any money to like build a big complicated hosting thing or like people do those businesses anymore. So you remove this like like derivatives capital like stuff of like the GPUs behind Wall Street are telling you to give them, they're telling you it's like every social network is just buying your data from you for $0, right? And then renting it back to you. Right. And so the
That's
same thing
true.
like happens with all these projects. The moment that you tokenize something, what you thought your project was, which might have been like to make a compute node that it's your personal server and it runs all your things that like run on our cloud like this, but remove the financial capital from it and you own it. Well, actually, now that we converted it into a token representation, that physical thing has just been bought by the market. And that's what's happened to Bitcoin. So like Bitcoin is now like a dollar asset. It's a dollar derivative,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Like it's a thing that you call up your 401k guy and be like, can you buy me some MicroStrategy so that I can get it the Bitcoin, right? And then by that time they've like they've like added a bunch of zeros to it on the wrong end.
And
So
so
with projects like Urbit, you can sort of track this life cycle, which is like, okay, well, there was speculative capital injection, and it like inflates the shit out of it through derivatives and speculation, and you're thinking about, and it increases the complexity, right? And we had a lot of that, even though I was like terrified of venture capital. We did raise from investors, and that like, people hype it up to the nth degree, like 10 to 100 times more than is really suitable for what you've got. And then you don't only have to deal with like explaining what you've got and what you're doing, but then you also have to deal with like people asking, 21 other questions around all of the second order effect implications of it. And, we had that from like day one. So it was already something where like where like you'd kind of like get burnt out trying to speculate over and see the big picture, because you would just be, it's like if you had a torch and you're like in an abandoned warehouse, and then you like point it in the corner and there's like 500 spiders, and then like you just get overwhelmed instantly by the amount of complexity, and then like run off away from things. I don't know if there's a good analogy, but like it's such an instant complexity that like you immediately can't, you're overwhelmed with it, and you can't, and you can't deal with it. So that speculative capital injection, the people who are the best at this are not Nvidia, actually, because Nvidia has had and continues to have a whole bunch of execution risk now from the fact that they're priced according to their potential, right? And that them being able to maintain a stable like stock price, asset price based on that speculative value is really difficult, because they could just have one bad run at
Right.
TSMC, which they have had, right? And it can mess with the whole project. So
Hmm.
MicroStrategy, in comparison, like they're like, cool, we don't have any execution risk because we don't do anything. I'm just going to buy Bitcoins and hold on to them. Buy my stock because I'll hold on to Bitcoins. And it's like, you test over like, well, what's the likelihood that he's going to run away with the multi-sig? And like, well, at least because it's one dude as opposed to all of the shit that like Sam Bankman-Fried did, that like, well, proportionally, we trust him more than Sam Bankman-Fried, and we trust him more than Jensen Huang, right? And there's all these new AI, Solana, meme coin things that like people experimentally trying to do that. Like there's a project called AI 16Z that basically they were trying to be like the next one past, they're trying to do the massive reflexive speculative capital growth of AI agents, and like tokenizing AI agents and getting them all to invest in each other, and do that. And they like came out of nowhere, and that's still around and like an interesting project. But it's kind of like the Urbit thing, but they like speed ran it. Like they did in like 6 weeks or something what takes like a Definity or a Solana or a Urbit or anything like 5 or 6 years to be able to do. And part of the reason that they could do that was that they were just leveraging the state of the art of pump fun and DAO's fun, like like speculative meme market, like big blocks on Solana, right? You couldn't have done that without something like a big blocks. And so, but that game hasn't been sort of answered. It's sort of like they're already playing, how do we generate lots of dollars really quickly? Nothing has been done at the overall market level to like take the speculative capital industry, which all of Bitcoin and all of the forks and every other like new startup project is all, even like XAI stuff and language models and all this type of thing. It's all speculative capital that's being printed that nobody has any clue how Masayoshi Son is going to like make back $500 billion from like, it's not really that, it's like actually 10, but it is a significant data center site that's being built out in Texas. Um, Nobody has any, he'll probably be dead by the time he needs to pay it back, right? But there's enough urgency in the actual sort of like systemic risk level of the top of the market, where this capital needs to be going to these things right now, because if it doesn't go into like hard assets that are relatively, that have this like ability to resist inflation, like it's hard to clone an Nvidia GPU. So therefore, if you have a bunch of money in the economy and everything else is going to get like wiped out by AI and Bitcoin in like the next in this halving too, then it's really unclear like where you should put your money. Like, well, if it's not going into NVIDIA GPUs and you don't have that capability, then like we're already at the sort of like post AI stage of just buying gold. But putting a bunch of money in gold doesn't really help anything either. It just sort of, and gold is still treated like a dollar asset. right? Like the reason for buying gold is because it's going to make you a lot of dollars and then you're going to sell it. Not because everybody is really like, there's no like, there's no, people aren't going out there and like starting to trade in gold,
Mhm.
right? Like your supermarket isn't accepting gold. In big markets where people are buying a lot of gold, like Wall Street, like in Wall Street, they're not trading a gold. They're not using gold as money. They're just using it as one of these like speculative assets, right? So it's really like people say like BTC is digital gold, but it's actually the other way around, where gold is now physical Bitcoin. And so I'm really interested in what is this overlap? What does it mean to have a physical Bitcoin? And can we make one that does that computational data markets thing that I talked about? And that was where we landed on, which is that we were able to massively reduce we were able to make it such that you could not speculatively amplify, you could not turn 2018 into a Kubernetes thing. If you came along with a bunch of venture capital money, there's no way to turn it to because we went off of this sort of Nvidia model, right? And so the Mac Mini,
Yay, the Mac
right?
Mini.
Because it can do Bitcoin, because I can have a phone call and we can generate information on it. Uh, well, it's a physical Bitcoin. Look, it's like shaped like that, right? And so the new one is has shrunk. So it's had a halving. So the new one is about this big. And we had this whole meme of like, the power you have to turn it upside down. Well, on the M4 Mac Mini, like the power button is on the bottom, so it's really funny, you know.
Oh man, I have the
Maybe
older
there's somebody at
model.
Apple that like,
Should I go
has
get
has
my
heard
Mac
about the
Mini
Mac
and
Mini
show it
Mini.
off too?
There's I don't know if you see, but the whole back wall here is
Yeah,
like
I see
is
it.
like filled with Mac Minis. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to
So we're gonna try
synthesize.
to fill it up to here, right? So
I love
we
it.
but that's around like, this idea. We had this notion of, well, what is this informational computational capacity of like when you have an AI processor and you have proof of work essentially, right? And the Mac Mini is like smallest little unit of like a little bit of AI and a little bit of SHA, and it's the most computer per dollar. It's an actual computer, so it's really good commodity. It's like massively mass produced. Um, uh, Everybody, pretty much everybody has a Mac Mini like in some cupboard somewhere, and so they can actually like have the experience of like being in the network without actually likely needing to go out and make any purchase, right? So they can immediately have this experience. But it represents, if we can shift Bitcoin from sort of like way under crap, like under resourced Raspberry Pi, and then actually they got all sold out in the last halving too, and then like a bit over the top like crazy GPU thing that like doesn't actually have display port. They're taking the display ports off them, and they don't have SHA instructions and everything, and you can't put a mouse and a keyboard on it. You have to buy all this like crappy, expensive like value adds like from Supermicro and stuff to be able to extract the value from the GPU and to be able to get the minimum. Well, a Mac Mini is sort of like the minimum unit of computational data, right? The Nvidia used a term of a data processing unit for the network controller. That's much closer to like how we use it, because we're not trying to like use it to do big massive simulations. We're just trying to use it to do really good, efficient, fast indexing and association, and then like you bring the intelligence to the user, right? So, but what I'm fascinated with is like what's going to happen. What else might go in the starter kit? What else might go in the basket of goods? That, at the moment we think that if everybody just does this and we don't need to like add anything else into the kit that would like increase the price. If we sort of like, if it's clear that it's that as long as you have like one node, then you can get the move away. Then that keeps the entry point. That keeps the cost of entry. And I'm not talking about onboarding in terms of like buying Bitcoin so that then you sell it and then use services, because there are no services, right? But the absolute minimum is that you need a computer that can sign transactions, but not just like sign a transaction, because there's no one that's just like you go out in the world and then you interact with someone. You also need, yes, you might have a Bitcoin wallet, which just use the computer for it, it's fine. You can trust the Apple hardware more than you can trust the Bitcoin wallet, even though it's secure. There's been lots of leaks. So if that was the minimum that you want to sell everything, all of your possessions and all you do is Bitcoin, then you're still probably at least going to need like a Mac Mini and a mouse and like mouse and keyboard and something probably, right? So yeah, so that's sort of like the project at the moment. But there's a potential that, hey, like we've had one halving. Well, maybe in the next halving, then the Mac Mini is this big.
Right.
And then maybe halving after that, it's the size which they already make Apple computers the size of your watch, that maybe it's this big. Um, and at that point, you start to just go, hey, that's a Bitcoin. What do we call these things? We call them Bitcoins because they're just computers that like have a five on it. It's like an M4. That's what the other funny thing about the Apple is like money supply, like derivatives
Oh
are
yeah,
called
yeah.
like M1 and M2
M1,
and
two.
M3 and
Yeah.
M4. And so in 2020 when the computational data market, like came as like the M1 came out and then the M2 and the M3 and the M4. And then we've got entire new levels of derivative, computational capital of like M8s and M9s and M10s, right? And the AI guys, they're really struggling with this at the moment because they have like crazy names for their products like GPT-4o1 Pro 3 Mini 17 beta, right? And uh, it's like, you get to the iPhone, whatever, and the naming scheme doesn't work. So we sort of like just picked really early, like this is our number, we're just gonna stick with it, right? And it's like an AI model that gets software updates, right? We're still at the kind of like GPT, going from like GPT-1 to GPT-2 to GPT-3. Maybe we get coherent by middle of next year. Then like people go, like they're doing the computational data market. Like that's, but the open AI guys had the same kind of struggle. It was like 7 years from when they were founded to when they shipped Chat GPT and that product actually sort of like crossed over the threshold of being something that anyone on their laptop can interact with it and understand what they're dealing with, whereas it was like gobbledygook nonsense and all of the earlier periods of that. And so we had the same sort of struggles, right? Yeah.
Okay, so let me try to synthesize what the overall pain points, problems, and solutions that you're offering the market here. Well, what I see is that you underlying um, the most important currency is information. Even in your mindset, it seems to be even more important than the dollar fiat. It's really information and how to accurately um, categorize what information is more valuable um, over other information. And it seems to me like you identify within the market an overall disconnect between um, the currency that we use and we speculate with, including dollars, and that you see a deeper level area of currency, of exchange, which is information itself. It is data itself. And I see that you've identified a huge problem in the world that you've seen, okay, well, Bitcoin is not just a coin, but it's also bit and it's Bitcoin. It is the coin of the internet. It is the technology that allows us to um, properly price information. And that the pricing system of information is in itself a very important way of identifying. It's an important message of information itself. The pricing system is a very important message to the world as to how things are valued. You see data as, and rightfully so, as the most um, use asset that at the same time does not have, and I can't find a better term for it, does not have a true free market that is separate from a couple entities manipulating it and having an advantage over the rest. In a sense, what I see you doing is working to free the market by emphasizing the bit aspect of Bitcoin, where you are now taking a stance which is a free stance away from Bitcoin itself, understanding that Bitcoin is expressed in three main ways: BSV, BCH, and BTC, and that you are also open to other networks like Blockchain, for example, where we could use these blockchains as a means of having better coordination in the market in terms of spending energy and having a better price signals regarding data in an open free market environment. Is this pretty much the overall picture here? Have I been able to really capture what it is that the challenge is here?
Mostly, I just wouldn't say that like I'm sort of like doing the free market thing. That's just what Bitcoin's did that
Yes.
like a long time ago, and sort of. But it's also been a speculative asset itself. It's based on subsidies, right? So what Bitcoin is or might become like has the same Urbit problem of like, well, it went and like consumed a bunch of capital and it like hasn't delivered yet, right?
I mean, it's
And so in
delivered.
that transition, but it does do this base infrastructure of like creating this amazing open like internet global free market, right?
Right.
So in that place, there's like lots of people who go online who are like, hey, can you give me $30 billion to build a really big computer? And
Well,
then they
Bitcoin
just like,
is the big computer.
they sell to the market, they tell the market like, hey, here's a big thing of like, can you give me the money? And then whatever words that they say to the internet that gets them to give them the money, like that's where it goes. Because a free market, there's all this free capital floating out there and free energy, and it's going to find somewhere to go. And like people got to say the right words, right? But notice how like in your thing, you're saying like, well, what's it's not just about the information, but it's about value. And so, well, what is XAI worth, or what is OpenAI? What is AI in general worth? People don't know. It's either worth infinite dollars or it's worth nothing. Well, that's just exactly what they said about Bitcoin, right? And it's not worth infinite dollars, and it's also not worth nothing, right? But if you had the information about Bitcoin that existed in 2010, that didn't have a price, did it? But it was really valuable. Now,
Right.
there's the information that's around today that, like, if you don't just buy like the free advertising, like if you're not on the free tier of the internet of like thinking that Sam Altman is doing anything interesting, right? uh, then which most of the world economy doesn't run on like free internet information, on social networks and stuff. It runs on like real companies that have intellectual property and that have non-disclosure agreements and that they don't put their top secret files like on Amazon. They like, they probably don't even put them on the computer, right? So there is this free market for information. What there isn't is like a price. There isn't like a
Exactly.
consensus over that price, right? Part of the reason that like Bitcoin got torn in all these different ways is because it was so good at that, and it just like was a massive, huge target. Like, hey, whoever can come to this huge pool of energy and capital, like all you have to do is run off with a few. It's like if there's like some huge Fort Knox of like unguarded gold, and then like the doors left open. Well, you don't have to like steal the whole thing, but like after a few couple of years of like people coming in and like running off with 3 bars, then a guy he like finds a bulldozer. He's like, well, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna load up all my trucks, right? And can you really blame them for that? Like, well, maybe we should have like put more investment in defending the but in this in what Bitcoin is to get started, it's just subsidies. So it is just this, hey, everybody take all your speculative hopes and dreams and capital and like lock them all up in this thing. And then like, thank you for sending me all your hopes and dreams and free capital. I'll sell at the top. Thank you very much. And like whoever, not not Satoshi necessarily, but I'm pretty sure like anybody who was around in those early days, like you're never going to hear from them anymore because they don't have any reason to, right? Yep. So it's about price and information. And what Bitcoin represents isn't like what the infrastructure was at the time. It was the information about what was going on in the world, and what and it carried the cryptographic algorithm because of the properties of that cryptography that carried with it certain capacity. And so all of that today, essentially, you have like a little bit of transaction processing, but it's not very good. The nodes network plus the base load of the cryptography. If you know how to make use of that cryptography, it's an enormously subsidized, infrastructure capacity that you can use to build secure information systems, right? But you can also hurt yourself with it. So it's like, there's a reason that Michael Saylor is kind of doing it because uh, people they can trust their broker, and they're paying a bunch of like important money people, so that, well, if they lose all their money, then so did all of the other people that have their retirement savings, like invested in Michael Saylor, right? And then people can put trust in a specific person when they do that too.
So there's been many different approaches to market in Bitcoin, and each one can be highlighted by appealing to an aspect of human desire and use case utility found within the Bitcoin architecture. I'd say that the BTC approach to market was appealing to, and it still appeals to, the lowest common denominator of, you actually do nothing with this. You just hold it, and it goes up in price because you just speculate on it. And with the idea of it being digital gold, with its monetary properties that justify it being digital gold, it's an asset that you can just hold and store value. You
But
had
what it
the
is, right? It's if you were convinced by that, at some point you actually just start buying physical gold.
Yeah, correct. Or complement it, right? Just see it along with with gold. Here is BTC, right?
No, because like the entirety, there's all this extra overhead and risk taken from the tokenization. That if you're really, risk averse, then you just end up buying the real thing. So Bitcoin, the BTC, like digital to gold narrative, has been an amazing advertisement for
It
physical
sure
gold
is.
because it's taught more people in the world. Even to the point that like Ron Paul might get to like end the Fed now,
Yeah, and
right?
the Fed. Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, yeah, and that was like 2008, like right before the creation of Bitcoin. Um, so but the question then is, if you did that, you're like, no, I have physical gold, thank you. I'm looking for, you know, these other properties of money. Like I can't spend gold on the internet, right?
Right.
Or like I'm looking to, account for little tiny, infinitesimal floating point unit things. Gold doesn't go that small.
Right.
Uh,
So
if
here,
you don't just necessarily like only hold gold, you have a home and you have, like assets and things, right? And so there
okay.
is the existence of digital technologies, and there's this like Bitcoin part of it. Can we turn that from the speculative subsidy token thing that just people treat as an actual just way to make dollars,
Okay.
right? And it's kind of out of ideas. Like I said with the Urbit thing, like Bitcoin has been like all of the ideas are already on Bitcoin Talk in like 2012. There is
I
no
know.
new information like being produced by Bitcoin. Like it's all gotten trained, it's all in the AI models. You can just go to that and it's all there, right? So
I'd say
uh
that they've tried to create a amnesia about these very important and other aspects of Bitcoin, so that it's almost like,
I wouldn't look at it as like a conspiracy sort of thing of people sitting in a room going, "How do I take out that?" It's really just people
okay,
in the free market going like, "I'm me and they're my enemy," and then there's lots of these battles that happen all the time. The
right.
collective like forgetting I view it as a technological thing because the GPU doesn't have any persistent memory on it. If a GPU, like had a blockchain file system with an SSD in there, then it wouldn't have that problem. They would just remember everything. But it's a
And this
technical
is what,
challenge for them to do that. But then there's
yeah.
also the fact that like information is valuable, so you're not going to give it away. So somebody has to come and like knock on your door and pay you from it. There is a huge information market of people constantly selling information for money, but there isn't like an advertising search index that you can go and like look up people for who's going to tell you something, right? Because it's a little bit in conflict with like how the 20th century world is kind of like still working. But on Bitcoin timescales, you just go forward 10 years, like all that's, that's already being sold by Pump Fun. Because they just like the moment that I saw this video, I think it was during the election, somebody was speaking and literally like faster than the transcription shows on the TV feed of like I can't remember what the clip was, but I think it was Trump.
Yeah, yeah,
Faster
yeah.
than like Trump is speaking, the words are showing up on the Pump Fun like new feed. So and like
Wow.
and then the TV signal is even delayed. So like the new word is coming on the Pump Fun like on the internet screen before you even see it on CNN,
Wow.
right? And so that market is already, and that's being like, tokenized into things on Solana. There isn't like a way to filter the Solana feed, but like, there's a lot of the like Twitch ideas that everybody was playing around in 2020.
Twitch.
Well,
Yeah.
that's there on Solana right now with like Pump Fun as like crypto 4chan, right?
Yeah,
And
but
4chan
Solana
was
can't
always like that as well.
we can't store data on Solana like you can on a BSV though. That's like the one aspect.
Well, it doesn't really matter because when you're looking for things that are like really high, real time,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. It's stored on the Pump Fun website. People don't give a shit
Okay.
about like some theoretical like technicality behind the scenes. They care about well, like getting information into your eyeballs as soon as possible. Like Twitter, yeah, it stores stuff kind of like, but you can't search it very well. So it's like sort of a little bit in between, right? But it has all of the audience. It doesn't matter. You could like great, just store it on your hard drive, but you're still going to post it on Twitter and distribute it. And same thing for Pump Fun. Like you might get a few little, people. It's like the Reddit new feed. There might be like 12 people that see your thing on Pump Fun, but you have all these capabilities, and then you just go on Twitter where you have the mass audience, and then people promote them there. So Elon, the reason that he's like king of the world at the moment is because he figured out how to monetize that. Like there were all these people, like squeezing Twitter dry for all of its value until it basically went out of business. And he was the guy who was going to be the worst hard at it. And then miraculously, he managed to pivot it and turned it from losing money into making money. And the valuation went up back up to 44 billion again. And the advertisers came back.
Okay. See, now we're talking about something you and I agree, which is using Bitcoin for these things that most people don't yet are yet to under see most people are yet to I know you said that it's still there in the Bitcoin talk forums from 2012, like that we can have models like spit out that information for everyone to learn right now, but there's still a like a mindset that has forgotten about what Bitcoin's truly capable of. um, where do you see Bitcoin Cash in this? Because Bitcoin Cash has this idea that Bitcoin was meant to have you spend coffee down the street. Whereas for me, yes, that's part of it. I can do that, but that really
For
doesn't
now, none
move
of the
me.
Bitcoins are relevant because Bitcoin itself has been replaced with this computational data market. So what people care about is not Bitcoin, but MicroStrategy. What's happening with MicroStrategy price? What's happening with the Nvidia price, right? What's happening with Elon Musk and Trump and everything and that level of and Doge, right? And think about before, well, Doge was like an altcoin. That's less that has less speculative value. That doesn't like it doesn't have Doge.com anymore, essentially, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't carry enough like extra speculative mimetic value in just being a Litecoin fork
Right.
with a funny picture on it. Or it's like in 2014, like there was like not Coin Easy, what was it? Kanye coin or something. There was like a Kanye coin, and
Hmm.
he like sued them and tried to shut it down and everything. And then like last month, he sold his Twitter account to like some Solana meme coin people. Trump has a meme coin and everything, right? So so this new market of like computation and attention and converting it into capital. In 2020, it was the GameStop thing. The GameStop thing was really like the proper kind of like that was like the pump fun of Reddit, right? That was like taking all of this like and the original Trump thing in like 2016 was very much like this as well. Right? And like Martin Shkreli, he was like the Beff Bezos EAC dude of the time and like Hillary Clinton and stuff like that. And all this like computational capital, that is what Bitcoin is. Like Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter is the actual value that sort of on a real time everyday basis that if you come in and you're like a degen doing work in the crypto market, Twitter is Bitcoin, like for all intents and purposes. It is the network that is connecting everybody, and it's the where people are putting, human capital in, and they're getting human capital out. So the reason that Elon is sort of like seems to be in this magical new position is because he is sort of like the first of the new Zuckerbergs. He's like not like Mark Zuckerberg, which was sort of like set up all these feudalism sort of things,
Yeah.
but like now that all that system has been done and we're now like going into digital economy, like Dorsey was kind of like the last of them, right? Like Dorsey Twitter to Elon Musk Twitter. Elon Musk literally turned from like a electric car subsidy farmer to this like mega risk management, you know, like put out all the fires everywhere all the time. And so he is like the king Bitcoin miner at the moment. And the reason that he can do that is he doesn't fucking say Bitcoin because there are all these other like things that need to be done that yes, that risk may also be speculative, but some of it is not going to be. And if nobody can do anything, then nothing is going to get done, right? So he was able to sort of like create, conserve as much of his own human capital that he could go put out fires, and the more he kept on putting out fires, the more he becomes like the emergency service on the internet, TV show that you're watching run around, right?
Yeah,
But
he
that
is
was
he
really
is the
like
top
a
Bitcoin miner.
last
You're
halving
right.
thing.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah,
He's
that was
doing
really look
Bitcoin at a
that
at a big very high at what Bitcoin should be doing. Yes, you're right.
even if he doesn't realize this is what he's doing, but the fact that he is, if he doesn't like solve whatever problem like Bitcoin is putting right in front of him, right, which is this reorganization of all of the capital and attention through compute and energy and everything in the world, uh, he's just going to be like the next guy to be taken out, and so whoever can fight that off the best. It's like a difficulty adjustment. Bitcoin mining is like, if you get behind, then you're out of the race. Like you have to
Right.
continuously like keep up and build momentum, right? And there was a really high risk around, in like early 2023 when he was coming into Twitter, and it could have gone either way. There was a really high risk that like Tesla could have been like Lehman Brothers,
Hmm.
right? That you could have had all that collapse, and that's why I think you saw a lot of the US political thing, like very sort of hurriedly. Everybody, like somebody tapped Mark Zuckerberg on the shoulder and said, like, you need to put on a gold chain,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's because it things came that close to like if Elon ended up as like a Sam Bankman-Fried type of thing
Hmm.
where his business is just like blown up and bust in one minute, and it's gone the next. And it's funny because with the Sam Bankman-Fried thing, like they have a lot of money there, they invest in Anthropic. If they didn't like succumb to that pressure at the time, he could be doing very well. He would be like, you'd have instead of Elon and Sam Altman, you'd have Sam Bankman-Fried and Sam Altman and like Anthropic OpenAI like beef going on. Yeah.
Bitcoin is now in. So what you're see, I try to understand what you guys, the whole 2188 movement, the Bitcoin monasteries movement, what you guys. I constantly try to understand what you guys are saying, and I think I do a good job at understand what you guys are explaining in your own words using different symbols, language craft. Like you guys are creating symbolic language and concepts that shine light to aspects of the world that we're in now, which is one where Bitcoin is the system of government, and it takes a moment to wrap your mind around that.
People sort of
Um,
think that we're the only ones that are doing it, but that's just because we're sort of positioned in the information environment that people know about us. when people are
Hmm.
exposed to us, they're probably not exposed to the other people that also do this. But like I said with Elon, like he's a main character. He's the biggest guy who's like playing this game, and he's solving the problems like of the same kind, but at such at a completely different scale and order of magnitude, and there's like way more capital tied up in it, right? Um, Jensen is sort of like a weird one because he was sort of like literally mining Ethereum, and now he's just kind of like the new Vitalik Buterin. He's like the sort of like number two next to Elon. And if you realize that he's actually just Vitalik Buterin, then it helps you like understand like, well, okay, this is everybody who holds Nvidia stock now, they're just actually holding Ethereum. Ethereum is kind of irrelevant since they turned off all their computers. Um,
Hmm.
but there's a couple of other sort of like people that we could point to. There's this guy who's like in the small block camp, who's the head of innovation at Space Force called Jason Lowry, and he's written a big MIT thesis on Bitcoin, like different ways of thinking about Bitcoin. But he kind of like, I don't know if this is sort of like his own struggle with like getting through the next barrier, or if it's really because like you're coming at it from like an institutional like military industrial complex view. But he always is like stuck at the think of Bitcoin in an analogy. And there's
Mm.
this thing called the symbol grounding or physical symbol grounding problem. And only like 5 years into this, and like, do I realize that Nick Land in 2016 on YouTube to like 20 people, he was trying to like say, there's this really funny clip from this guy called his handle is Cuntbot. And he would in 2016, when like Trump was getting elected, he's like screaming, Trump is trying to solve the problem of German idealism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
saw that video. Yes.
and I only just realized like we spent a lot of last year like so we're working on like much more like these physics models and things that are coming down the pipeline. I only just realized that like this book that I bought in like 2018 or something is like literally the it's like the object of the concept of the object of a concept of an object. If that makes sense. So in it, he
So it's
talks
like,
about
okay,
symbol grounding. This is critique of judgment. In it, he
wait,
talks
is that
about
Immanuel
symbol.
Kant?
Yeah, Immanuel
Okay.
Kant. Yeah. So in it, this is
Okay.
his third. This is like the return of the king of Immanuel Kant, except that people don't get it when he gets to the end of the book. Um, they should put all the three in one thing. In it, he talks about achieving like the universal as an aesthetic. So taking the universal from like a abstract idea and making and physically confronting you with it because you managed to take what was universal and embed it in something that is real and physical. And so if you have the ability, the ability to do that is like proof of the consistency of how things are working. And so like we didn't realize that this was what we were doing. We were just drowning in this complexity of like how do we explain all these different things because we had too many, Bitcoin just like generates 1800 metaphors. And until we like nailed in, yeah, but like for this mix of things that we trained on in our AI process, our model that came out of the end of it, which we really want you to buy, is this thing. And we can talk literally about it, and it doesn't have this like infinite risk, exposure that comes out, right? And Elon, he's been able to turn AI from like a research thing with PhDs and algorithms and like Google Cloud hidden mysterious stuff. So like literally turn the whole hypercloud cloud virtual machine industry. Like great, we don't need anything from Intel anymore. We just want one really, really, really big building that uses lots of megawatts. Right. And that's what I mean by like this is what Bitcoin is doing, because this exact same type of facility that is the state of the art in Bitcoin miners is now what the AI is literally the same companies that were like that build the big Texas Bitcoin mining facilities now build the like building the open AI one at least in Texas for Sam, right? So that is at least from sort of like the end of Bitcoin subsidies is the market that we're in at the moment that I was calling like computational data markets to start thinking about the real value that's being provided by the computers. Um, but but where that was sort of like the 2020 version of it. And we're now moving into this like next phase where I used to sort of like the word one of my words for 2028 in 2020 was information creation. So it's like bit and coin. So it's like an ability to you can use this thing to create information because you can coin bits rather with it, right? And the other interesting word, by the way, in coin is a coincidence, and it comes from the same etymology. But in my view, like Bitcoin is sort of like, when you have the four things are like the good times and the bad times and the hard times and stuff, and the
Hmm.
weak men, is
Yeah.
that Bitcoin has a cycle that in once every 12 years, you get all three properties of money together. So you get like a golden era. And then after that golden era, you have to go back and like recharge for like 9 years. Oh, well, sorry, sorry, in 4 out of every 16 years. So in a halving cycle. Per halving cycle, you have one is my view is like was this information creation thing. And now, like, after we spent 4 years of figuring out how to do that, then like Elon Musk and everybody, they're like, we have to go figure out how to computationally generate data because we're out of it. We already collected up all of the free data that everybody left on the internet. Does anybody have any more free gold bars that I can collect? No, you already collected all of them, right? And we, after the halving last year, we sort of like although we had the capacity for that, that was no longer like the central focus. The central focus is now on how do we take that capacity that was developed in research and development. And this is true as well for the AI people. You can look at what the AI guys are doing and the priorities in the AI market has moved from how do we do the research and development to invent the ways of doing things that we don't know that we need to be doing it. They did that in the last cycle, and that led to ChatGPT and Transformers. In this cycle, it's all about mass production. It's who can figure out how to take that. And you see like Nvidia announcing their sort of like Mac Mini thing. Apple actually make an AI Mac Studio that costs a huge amount of money that has 500 gigs of RAM in it now. So like it's much easier when you think about, yeah, there's Bitcoin money is paying for, can you max out the RAM for what's physically possible beyond what's configured on the website that exists? Right. And so we're moving into this mass production phase. And you can look at things in previous eras along these cycles too, in my view, but that it becomes more distinct over time as we're moving forward and moving off subsidies. And then after, so it's like information creation, mass production, and literally AI is turning from some mystical thing in the internet to like the biggest fucking most expensive building that you can imagine. In the next phase, it's going to be energy generation. And so we'll have figured out, Elon will figured out how you design the AI data center, and it will be a productized reference commodity thing that, like, hey, everybody on the planet, can you go and build your best state-of-the-art AI data center, please? Right? And
Well,
I'm not in the
isn't that
business of,
Bitcoin?
well, but Bitcoin did it speculatively. So they built the model, but it's not
Right.
something that's actually capable of solving somebody's problem. All it is like at the
But
state of
it's,
the art, the most advanced strategy of any of the Bitcoin miners
yeah.
was that they just figured out how to obviously build the site, and they have gigawatt sites that exist that mine Bitcoin. That the AI people are not at that level yet. That's very prized real estate. But what they figured out how to do is what's called become a large flexible load. So any data center, including all these AI training things and all these other hyperscale stuff, they all operate on like 100%, like 99.99999% uptime and availability. And the issue is that model and all the overheads and redundancy and waste and everything that goes into like making them, there's an Azure data center like 3 minutes drive from me up here in New Zealand, like up on the hill. And they started building that in 2020. And part of the thing that led us to the Mac Mini was like, okay, like they're filling that with Intel chips, so it's already like it's already redundant. They haven't finished building it yet, and that was part of like what drove me to get on the Mac Mini. Can you do an A/B test in Silverdale in New Zealand of like, yeah, if there's a guy with a bunch of like Mac Minis hooked up to a residential consumer internet and electricity supply, like, in the down by the tradies, like in the warehouses, like 3 minutes drive from the nice, pristine, expensive, premium, overpriced Microsoft data center real estate. Who can actually, like, compute more value out of it?
Wow.
You only have these one reference, like state of the art type of data centers at the moment. But I also liken it to the America's Cup racing, where they like try to build the best yacht in the world. And by the way, that's like the oldest. That's like one of these things, like the longest chain. The America's Cup is like the oldest sporting competition in existence. Goes back to like the World's Fair in London in like 1890 or something, or 1860, one of the 18 something. And New Zealand, like, is very famous for having, like, we made it our competition. So like, we win it every year. It didn't used to be that way. But it's a design competition. So you get the best sailors in the world, and they're trying to just invent they have a reference class. So they have some rules around this is the framing of the competition. And
Yeah.
when I say, like, yeah, we weren't making language models, that mean it's like we showed up it's like everybody was like, yeah, guys, like show up in Athens at like 12 o'clock, like on Tuesday, like start of next month. And then we go to like Athens, Texas instead of Athens in Greece. And we're like, fuck, probably should have known that, like, they meant the one over there. Right. It's the Schelling point thing. They always talk about the Eiffel Tower with that. And that there's these really, really, really expensive. They're taking like all the speculative capital on the market, and they're pooling all this risk in like a small number of very specific sites in Texas and Tennessee, obviously, where XAI have their facility, and they're growing that, and one being built by Meta in Louisiana. Right. And so for now, the expanded Texas triangle, essentially, that is the entirety of the market. It looked for a time that like Bitcoin mining might move to Japan, and that the Japanese might do that. But the Japanese just took all their speculative money and they just put it back into Texas again. And they did that with the Bitcoin miners that are there in Texas, from the last couple of cycles.
Yeah.
As well, right? So
Yes.
anyway, the end conclusion is that the market at the moment is speculative, but it's like applied speculative. It's like, hey, we're going to have a huge, massive, take all the extra dollars that, the United States is going to get destroyed by global capital. If people on the internet, how to outcompete us, great. We're going to print every dollar in existence. Now we've printed all the dollars, so there's no extra. The dollar is hard money again, right? Only if you know how to get onto like the state-of-the-art America's Cup sailboat manufacturing team, if you know how to build the better thing that's going to win us the race, then you get permission to come in and like spend these extremely, because they are valued now, right? So they do know what the AI is worth, because at least like to the point that it's worth defending the dollar hegemony and all this and reshoring the American industry and everything. It's worth printing every single dollar that is possible on it, right? And because otherwise that capital is just going to get printed somewhere else. And there's a really famous like I think BIS or Bank of England report from like the financial crisis, where they talk about how when private banks lend money, that they are creating money, right? Like, so the modern fiat economy is a huge free market. The meme of like the Federal Reserve is the big evil thing, and like the Central Bank of New Zealand and the interest rates or whatever, like they don't print money. Like the Bank of England had to bail out all of the pension funds in 2022, like a week after, 10 days or something after the Ethereum GPUs turned off, because every pension fund in England was like using GPUs to yield farm with government bonds like stablecoins. And
Oh,
the
really?
Liz
I didn't
Truss
know that.
came,
That's
the Liz
funny.
Truss like, came out and like did the budget, and they're like, fuck, we didn't think she would go this far. And it like made them all bankrupt. And I had like a meeting set up behind the Bank of England that got cancelled like that very day. Yeah, they had to bail out. It was like 65 billion pounds or something, which seems like small money now, right? So they do at the moment, like there is this understanding at the center of the market that like we have to say the number. And like Sam Altman, he's a bit volatile, so he'll go to the Saudis and say 7 trillion. And it's like, Sam, Okay, it's got to be for more than 5 billion, but like 7 trillion is a bit much, and like building 49 fab TSMC fabs, like come back with something a bit more. And so they like Masayoshi-san, he's like 500 billion. I can't do a Japanese accent, but he's like Mr. Trump. No, I can't do it. But
Hmm.
he's like, I found 500. You told me to go back and find 200. He was like, hey buddy, can you turn that 100 into 200 for me by next week, please? And he like comes back and he's like 500, right? And
Yeah.
he has like Sam Altman and Larry Ellison. And Larry Ellison, by the way, he's like very famous because he put lots of money in the America's Cup. So he's used to these kind of competitions, right? And it was Sam, and then and I also find it's funny. It's like Sammer, like the handle of Sam Altman. It's sort of like the same name as Masa. It's like
Hmm.
Masayoshi-san. It's like they're Ponzi schemes. Like they're caught up in exactly the same game. So when it's you ever remember the meme of like Calvin Ayre, like shaking
Shaking
hands with
himself.
Calvin Ayre?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, it's the same thing that's happening. It's like Elon and Jensen. They're literally both in the Nvidia business, except one is just like chief customer and one is chief. He said it yesterday. He's like chief revenue destroyer. Like there's just there's the buyer and the seller. There's the supply and the demand, and it's like supply and demand, doing this in the market. And they're like, great, like we've just solved the market by getting these two people in the room that are like the top, and they just shake their hand together. And very similar thing with like, and then let's take all of the competitors to these people and then like put them together, right? And then like shake hands and like, well, whatever bigger is the biggest number that you can come up with in your spreadsheet master for like n degrees of like derivatives amplification on like how many floating point operations that you can do in Texas, um, then then like just tell us that number and over we want it to last till the end of the Trump admin. Tell us like the biggest number that you see on your spreadsheet from now amplified to based on everything till 2028, which is the next halving, by the way. And then we'll just go put and literally like his spreadsheet, I think it's just sitting there updating. Like one, it says 100, and then he goes away for a week, and he comes back, and it's and Trump has the same spreadsheet, probably the same models, and the other one says 200, and he's like, "You better not be saying 100." And then he's like, and then he comes back, and then the spreadsheet is updated, and it's like, "You need to go and say 500." Right? And that's what I was meaning about COVID, where like there's these numbers that grow and there's reflexive like perception off of things, right? Um, is entirely likely that, well, behind the scenes, a lot of people are really just like looking at this as a stable coin sort of flat line thing. Like, well, we only have so many, we have certain fabs, we have certain amount of capacity, we have certain amount of chips that come down the line. So really nothing is really changing there. Like, yes, you may have some like shrinking miniaturization that happens on a predictable basis. But the if that resource like isn't well managed, then it could just get, torn up 5 different ways, and then like somebody bombs Taiwan and nobody can get any chips anymore. And so there is all these like speculative like risk scenarios that could be much worse than whatever big number that people are coming up with in the market at the moment. So that's sort of what's interesting about where we are in 2025 versus in 2020. Because in 2020, this felt like we need to go right now and like try to figure out how we put a price on information because it's going to blow up, right? And like, 2 months after that, it was like all world travel is shut down. Nobody go anywhere or do anything or say anything to anybody and cover your face, right? Because in my view, there was that much risk in the economy at the time, and I really felt that, and like, that pushed me to get into this. But what you can see now is that there is a price on information, at least at the Wall Street level, and that, well, nobody is doing $1 trillion for Sam Altman yet. They're actually like quite happy to have figured out the number that we can lock in for the next 4 years roughly. And then, hey, Sam, you better like figure out how to, pay us back our hundreds of billions of dollars, by 2029, or you're going to look a little bit like that Sam Bankman-Fried guy over there. Um, yeah. Okay. So the question is like, can that be brought down to the consumer? And Bitcoin, in a way, it was that in early 2010s, but it was that speculatively. So it was the sort of like market printing its own money to incentivize like this transition. And there's all this like legacy infrastructure that it like really wants like the US government, like, or whatever institutions and things that exist in the market, to provide them a buffer to like move from this world in which they're vulnerable to GPUs just coming in and like, devouring all of their infrastructure, right? Like I went to a thing in town the other day, and there's some guy who's like tapping me on the shoulder, being like, "Hey, you look like a potential like startup founder," and he's like, just got a job at the venture capital firm in town. He's like been doing it for 3 months or something. And I just sort of and I like ask him, so did you just graduate? What did you study? And he said he was training to be a doctor. So great, like some like the society has like invested in like some guy to get all the way like deep into medical school, and then right at the front line where he's about to start his career, where he's actually going to like help a person,
Yeah.
he's like, actually I'll just go like LARP as a venture capitalist. And I was like, well, are you on Twitter, like, and he doesn't even use Twitter. So he doesn't even
Huh.
know how to like do the job of venture capitalist. So he's not even doing that, right? And it's the easiest job in the world, because at the moment the entire venture capital like industry is just Nvidia. All you have to do is like buy Nvidia stock, and then like great, you've like done your job. Like go around and like find the Nvidia project that you want to play around with, right? But New Zealand is like especially like that sort of part of the economy is very lagged, where they don't understand like what's happening in the world economy at the moment. And so like that guy will probably, in like by 2030, there won't be any venture capital business anymore. And he'll be like, and probably in my view, it takes you like 10 years to do this, because it like really took, I kind of like from when I finished university and started getting involved in like startups and GPUs and everything, and Bitcoin, like by the time that sort of like speculative thing and everything is gone, it's like 10 years have passed. So I think there's going to be a lot of that. They're just, you can imagine some of these people, some of these like Zoomer kids that they never even like went to university, because like their whole university or like into high school was all in COVID lockdowns and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, that there's going to be a big, by we're only really, like I said, it's only really like one halving past, but you can also sort of look at it as like we're halfway through the 2020s now. So in the same way, well, it felt like a long, infinite long, like never ended time when we are going through it. But when you think about it, like, well, March 20th March, like 2025 isn't very like far long since
Yeah.
20th March. I think it was like 19th March or something, 2020, right? It's like 5 years to the day pretty much. And by 2030, I've also sort of said this to people like in respect to Trump, because you had a Trump admin and then now you have one again, and that like there's a lot of confusion, destabilization, sort of like trying to wake up, from a coma sort of experience in the market, like you've got amnesia. It will take most people in America like until 2030 to realize like what actually happened, with the re-inauguration of Trump, to actually be able to be far away from that point. In the same way that people are like now they're kind of enough away from 2020 that people start to go, what the hell was going on in 2020 and what happened to me, you know?
Hmm.
And that you can have that conversation relatively normally. And from the left perspective, mostly they're just like, please don't talk to me about that, and then vote, and then we're kind of in a big recession where they just don't want to talk about it at all. But my view is that by 2030, people will be ready to talk about it, wanting to talk about it. And the issue is that if a lot of these like remaining risks, like the AI stuff doesn't actually work, Yeah, like the same AI technology that like you're using on your laptop and like consuming every day is exactly the same technology that was like fueling everything in 2020. Every single decision, you know, all of the information that you're being exposed to, the entire recommendation algorithm, it's all these GPUs that are doing the same kind of processing. And the same sort of like speculative amplified like viral incentives and modeling. Um, uh, if that if that hasn't been patched up, i.e., if people don't know how to use Bitcoin to manage the risk of the AI, in terms of the what it does in the information environment, you will literally be back to like 2020 part two again. And that's I think that it's like not unrealistic at all.
Yeah.
But it's our job if we actually have the technical exposure and we have gone through like the last 4 years being able to observe what's happening and like we still have our sanity. It's our job still to like, well, we may be in a deep recession and there's no like speculative money around to kind of like prop up people for the like, yeah, you maybe have to spend those Bitcoin things that you like collected up for a rainy day and the rainy day is here now. Maybe you need to, like dig into, do a deep search in your pocket for some of those Satoshis and right and figure out something that you can put them to work towards that is going to generate a real value, right? That's going to remove a real risk. And so it's our job to do that pricing. That's a naturally like how pricing like works in the economy. But to this day, people still price Bitcoin in dollars. And if you are still pricing Bitcoins in dollars and not dollars in Bitcoin, then you may think that you'd spend all your day you're like on the Bitcoin industry, but you're really more in the Michael Saylor business of conserving American dollar capital. And if you're in that business, like Maya suggests, just go do the AI thing because there's already a big sort of national Manhattan Project thing of, hey, if you know how to write CUDA or metal code, then yeah, there are still jobs for you to go out there and do that. The issue is that most people in crypto, they don't actually have expertise. They have sort of like they're faking signaling their human capital of like convincing themselves that because they asked the chatbot something that they learned it in 5 minutes. And the issue is that although yes, they may have just gotten that skill, they don't have the long-term knowledge of having worked on that in the past and like the other eras, like lower difficulty. So they're only really, able to, they need to be working at the front lines, right? And most of the hard work at the moment isn't on the front. Like the AI kind of like solves most of those frontline problems because you just like AI can do your spreadsheet for you now. It's these like big deep strategy for like like small numbers of like like Intel. Intel has a big their board. They fired the CEO, the founder of VMware, and so now they're sort of in a crisis right at the very moment that Intel has actually solved their so they had like a very, very, very technical CEO that right at the very moment that Intel's actually fundamentally solved its competitiveness issues, which is it looks like the 18A fab process of Intel is going to be the best in the industry. And like even Nvidia is currently looking at using the Intel fab process. Basically, like the CEO gets like, thank you very much for like creating all that value. Please go away and because they exist in this like manipulated market
Hmm.
where if that isn't planned as like, well, at some point in the next before the next halving cycle, we're just gonna like take all of that Nvidia capital and like make in the same way that like it used to be the Intel price and the Nvidia price, and then now it's like, whoa, we had a flippening, and it's like Nvidia is the new Intel, and it's like, yeah, Nvidia is not the new Intel. We're just like, let's just go like punish Intel for a bit, put all the money over there, being like, you guys are doing a great job, and sell GPUs to everybody, and then like when they're all out of the GPU thing, and be like, Jensen, your drivers still don't work. Then they'll go put them over there, right? And that's why I like Apple because Apple is sort of like they're like, this is like the game of the Protestants. You got all the denominations, whereas Apple is kind of like safe. There's like a very famous, there's a very famous like write-up. I can't remember. I'd have to find the link, but it basically explains like, well, the PC, Apple is Catholic, and Microsoft is Windows, Mac OS is Catholic, and Microsoft Windows is Protestant. And so when you have the PC and you can glue together all your parts in all the different ways and change all your backgrounds and make it all how you want, then this is from the 90s or something.
Hmm.
So in comparison, like if you're looking for like a stable investment of just a computer and you don't need all the bells and whistles, then like between the drama of like Intel and Nvidia, then it's is it American 1960s like American Gordon Moore? Is that going to be the American dynamism, or is it going to be this like Elon Taiwan thing, right? And so look for that transition. Like rumor is that the fab process is looking really really good. I also view it as like Intel has real business that you still run real computers and operating systems on, and Nvidia is a long, long, long way away from doing anything anywhere close to that. Like so, these any Nvidia computer you have to use through an Intel or an AMD or an Apple device. They did try to buy ARM to get into the CPU game, but they don't really have. They've made lots of like CPU integrated GPU, products in a long time, but it was mostly just a way to try to, yeah, like sell more GPUs, essentially. So they have a lot of like huge technical debt, essentially from their fundamental business that they're in, that really restricts them from becoming a CPU company. And if they became a CPU company, then somebody would just come along in 5 minutes and do that better. Like there's a company, startup and run by he used to be Intel's like he's basically the US's most famous CPU designer, Jim Keller. Designed Tesla's chip, designed the AMD Athlon and 64-bit, and uh um he was the head chip architect like under until 2020 at Intel, and he has a chip company called TensorTorrent, which is sort of like they're at Nvidia. They're well funded, like 200 million or something, like sort of chip upstart that's competing with Nvidia, where they're making a CPU. They're using a different kind of RAM, so they don't compete on the same level with the amount of like they're not competing over the same commodity of the high bandwidth memory that they put on any kind of AI accelerator. And Yep. So I'm quite interested in seeing if they show up in here. Potentially, they may just sort of get folded back into Intel or something, but possibly. Well, who knows? I think Intel had a patent for a while on an ASIC, on a Bitcoin ASIC, and I think that they sold it to Block. So I think that's like the Block. Square have some Block. They have some mining operations still some involved somewhere, and they have that patent. Okay.
Here, let me ask you. I know you're. It's probably been a while. How much longer do you have with us?
Let's say like 5, 10 minutes.
Awesome. So, what's the 21E8 to market strategy?
Well, main thing is that like all of that speculative sort of like thing, like we did that in the last halving cycle. We had go-to-market strategies, and then like from the very beginning, we were locked down, couldn't go anywhere for 2 years. So
Hmm.
we were always just sort of. I had in what I did originally, and think this is actually like before the 2020 halving, essentially, because it was like in January 2020. We did these tests to see if you can use proof of work as like essentially an alternate algorithm for
Yes.
distributing content, right? For
Okay.
for recommender systems, and that was before we set out about building that technology. But we knew that like, hey, you can just go on Bitcoin and do this like this. So from that core thing, there's like from that point that we could work. The idea was that well, we can work towards building specific products like that make that work for what you would use Google or Twitter to do. In 2022, that market got disrupted,
Hmm.
right? So even sort of like the plan that I had at that time, that was that the market appeared, and we weren't playing the same game, right? Um, it's like you're on some like the entire wrong generation of console or something. Like you're on a completely different server. So uh, so a lot of that just had to be basically accelerated to its eventual conclusion, and I had a team and everything, working, and as it's now just just me for a while still. But we have sort of like, we started on this from Twitter, and there wasn't just this sort of like, and you could even, you can chart it back to the COVID events too, but it wasn't just this sort of like ChatGPT moment. It was also this like Elon moment with Twitter, right?
Hmm.
And so
Right.
really like from the perspective of being a signal that you can come and do this alternative algorithm and distributed, like this is that, right? And like the number of people who are aware of that, and then that's something that anybody can come on, and by associating with information and the way that we put it out there, you acquire that capacity, right? So I don't make any money off of it at the moment. Like we lose lots of money, like supporting that platform, like on X, but instead of like paying an affiliate verified organizations bill is a much lower way to provide that like network than if we tried to host our own website and we'd have to hire lots of people and everything, right? And so you can look at actually Urbit as sort of in a similar kind of camp, that they really got sort of like that Milady thing. Like they were really just this NFT and this like, gated community. So the Milady people really did that like much more efficiently. They may still have sort of like kind of crypto products and everything, and they have a coin now as well, which doesn't seem like it has really like help them build any momentum like more than they had in the past. But they basically just have a bunch of people on Twitter, and they also it kind of took them like 18 more. It took them quite a long time to have an official kind of company Twitter account that handed out badges, and it's sort of like they make money from people doing that with the Ethereum NFTs. So they sort of like provide that service, similar to, but they do sort of, we're doing it in like the Dorsey era, like Ethereum NFT. Makes sense? Like they're sort of in this Urbit camp. So we come at it from the Bitcoin side, and not like digital identity and NFTs, but rather just proof of work. Um, and so for now, like we have this go to market where we do sit exactly in the sweet spot between, the AI market as it exists at the moment, which is still sort of like design competition, right? It's not the same thing as like the hyper speculative markets that existed in the last halving, but it's also not what we think the market is going to become, which is these types of AI like node hardware that people are doing at the moment. But Nvidia doing it is still just because they're kind of like trying to convince their investors that they warrant a premium above Apple, and their multiples are about this. They're down to about exactly the same now. Apple just announced like 2 weeks ago a 512 gig Mac Mini, so you can run these biggest models pretty much on just like two $10,000 Mac Studios, right? And $20,000 Mac Studios, well, it's about how much I paid for that crappy super micro server that doesn't do shit for me in 2020. So if I was trying to do what I was doing in 2020 today and get into computational data markets, I would just buy the Mac Studios, right? But that's because the state of the art and public of that technology is that you need to be able to run the biggest model to keep up. So it's entry, that's the entry point. Um, you and I, anyone who's in Bitcoin knows that you can basically just, have a crappy little Raspberry Pi and probably an iPhone, right? And essentially do the same sort of inferencing, because you can just sort of process the information, on the ASIC up here yourself, and you don't have to pay Jensen Huang for that, right? But for people that maybe like they don't have Bitcoin, then when they go and do this AI thing, it gives them the feeling, it gives them this sort of like inferencing capacity, predictive power, or projection power that Bitcoin gives you, proportional to how much you got and how long you've been holding it and how much information you've been able to take in that process, right?
So you
So
buy the
so
Mac Mini, and there's 21.8 software within
so
the
we
Mac
well,
Mini.
Well, but this is the point, is that like we had this like speculative thing for not how do we go to market as a business so much as like we actually kind of did that because we just knew that we can anytime that we want, we could go onto Twitch and like post things and people pay us money.
Hmm.
Right? The thing was the speculation was like, can you take that and run a actual, Twitter style social network with it? And really like that project never got off the ground because like the whole COVID era meant that you couldn't go anywhere, say anything, do anything, or even look weird ways at people, right?
Hmm.
So we spent a long time trying to grapple with, okay, if you can't do the speculative thing and we're all kind of like trapped in this thing, how do we solve that? And what came out of it was this notion of the physical Bitcoin and how what we could best identify as the thing, not necessarily for that was currently a speculative asset that people were treating as physical Bitcoins, because you could say in the last cycle that that was this H100. But H100, there's Jensen Huang saying like, "Don't buy H100, please." Yesterday. Um, but at the same time, he's announcing this like, here's our new DGX server, and it's like the size of a M2 Mac Mini, right? But the M4 Mac Mini has come out, and it's like $599 US. So there is an if I had sort of like kept on, was able to take what we were doing sort of in the 2022 and 2023 time, and then like carry that through into this halving and still had a team, we would have still had to pivot off of how do we go to market with search technology, because the search technology was out there and done, and Google was disrupted. So there wasn't any like you're not going to try to convince people to build a different data center. They're already building their Nvidia data centers, right? But we had enough insight for like, yeah, but those Nvidia data centers aren't really that good. They're really expensive. They have all these other problems. If you're and when you work on Bitcoin, you're a lot more directly at the heart of the problem, whereas those guys are dealing with like all kinds of other just random crap that doesn't matter, like uh, safety training and stuff like that. They don't need to worry. It's like just compare XAI data center to building a Bitcoin mine. Like building a Bitcoin mine, like it doesn't even need internet. You're basically just building like warehouses and doing the electrical work. But that base work, if you focus on that and do it at Bitcoin scale, much better than when you're trying to do an AI training center, right? And they retrofitted an Electrolux factory for that. So they didn't actually build in the AI industry, they're not building that like building part of the data center. Um, so like we don't really have any capacity. It's very similar to the Urbit situation of like speculatively go out and plan some big thing and whatnot. What we knew and what we could see with Nvidia's business model and the risks of their inventory and the risks of their manufacturing, and then we could also see with MicroStrategy and like, well, what is it at the Bitcoin side, and then what are his strengths and weaknesses, because they're very much the opposite. Where does this weird physical Bitcoin like thing, where do we fit in there? And the conclusion of it was this concept of like Apple Silicon being something that you can treat like a stable coin because it's the most commodity, right? It is the most
Mm.
mimetic and it's the most stable. Like an Apple computer depreciates less than any other like IT asset at all. Now, if you approach it from a dollar lens rather than a Bitcoin lens, then you're still going to look at that's a bad investment because it doesn't make me any dollars. But that's because dollars don't know how to use computers and Bitcoins know how to use computers, right? So like if you're in the business of like holding on to a huge inventory of some computers, and which not really doing that. I do have a bunch of computers that I was like left with from the previous from like the previous cycle. Um, but what we're doing at the moment is more like, well, there is this collective computing capacity that is a Bitcoin property, but at the moment it's like hamstrung on these crappy little Raspberry Pis and it's not useful and everything, right? Like it's like 5 years and they're still talking about Teranode and apparently you use GPUs now. I could have told them in 2020, like, don't use Java. Like, it's a dead end. It's not going to work. Like, you need to use GPUs. I could have told them that in 2020. And that was like how I viewed the market in 2020. We need to put GPUs in the Bitcoin node, right? A couple of years after that project and not really making, getting to go to market on it, We realized that, hey, that's not actually that great an idea anyway, because there's these things called Apple Silicon now that didn't exist in like, March 20 or April 2020 or whatever when the Bitcoin mining halving happened during the lockdown. That didn't exist then. So we couldn't act out like that wasn't a reality that we could just like plan and act on, right?
Hmm.
Similarly, if I had although we did have this idea of like, well, we would really love to become Google AdWords and like Bitcoin mining put together and like be the ad engine that prints all the dollars. Like we knew how to do that technically, but if I was like, well, Elon Musk is going to buy Twitter and he's going to pivot the whole business from like advertising and journalism and media and censorship and everything and put it all onto magical numbers and Doge things and tick marks, then that would have been pretty implausible. So I couldn't have taken that seriously and like planned some go to market based on that. But by the time that happened, Bitcoin had much more quickly had its like had been subject to this like macro wave of like what became ChatGPT. So before that actually happened, but the Bank of England thing, like the FTX thing, like Ethereum turning off the GPT, even the stablecoins, that macro like wavefront, like that hit the whole Bitcoin industry in late 2022. And so I also couldn't have, if you asked me in 2020, like, are the biggest Bitcoin miners in the world with several hundred megawatts, they're just going to lose faith in BTC. And so we did end up in this position in the market that is extremely valuable. And literally the only other guy, the only sort of other two people in this position is Elon. And then Zuck, just because he just runs a social network and has data centers anyway, so he can copy trade them and keep up, right? He doesn't really have the intuition or like know how it works. But X, he like plugged the revenue gap in X and then did the AI business second, right? Whereas something like Sam Altman, he's sort of going on the timeline sort of like last week and like how do I uh like he's talking about getting into the social. They're thinking like, do we need a social product? And the answer is actually yes, you need a social product. But if you're doing that now and not in 2023, then forget about it because you don't know, what, like in the same time that Threads came out. So if OpenAI came out with like a Twitter competitor when Threads launched, then they would have had this AI business, right? And they could have like integrated that and they could have had a chat GPT like data feed, and then brought over people from Twitter when they were leaving to Blue Sky and they were leaving to Threads. That didn't happen. Elon managed to keep the users in Twitter for a large part,
Hmm.
and then he went and took that like uh, fading social media advertising business like Capital that was losing a lot of money, right? And he like massively downsized and such. But the important thing was then he set up an AI business, and a lot of the founding team of XAI they came from Tesla. So there was like a similar collapse in value while Twitter was going down. That Tesla could have very easily gone out of business, and because Tesla AI essentially XAI is now an independent company. Um, that that reduces the need to continue to compete on this like AI front which is what they were doing, in 2021, 2022 timeframe. They were making competitors to Nvidia GPUs and building $500 million, supercomputers, right? And so they're not doing that anymore. They just focus on the car. And so the market like keeps that around. It still wants, and he has real factories, which in my view, like that factory business is going to be really important come 2028 to 2032. We're still in this like build the data centers, like come up with a new reference architecture for data centers, like without any Intel in it, right? And it's Bitcoin style, like MicroStrategy style dollar markets that are paying for all of that, right? And they have a benchmark to compare themselves against with the mining facilities. But by the 2028 to 2032 halving, it's going to be really important build build and it's like you will have a site like this in Ohio that they've opened. I think it's a $1 billion like he's building like autonomous drones and things. Whether his products like actually ever get used for anything is another question. But like it's kind of like the perfect company that like you can't tell if it's a video game like NFT thing where they're just like really big fanboys of military history and technology, and that they don't actually like ever intend for any of their products to ever be used anywhere. And he's a cartoon character.
Hmm.
Right. So to some extent. And so like Jason Lowry, he's a little bit like that. Sort of like from that perspective. If you like study, if you kind of expose to our information and you go listen to Jason Lowry, you literally realize he's talking about exactly the same thing, except he's really saying like, hey, we need to use proof of work to secure like, you know, all the government agencies because they all run on like Oracle databases and things, and anybody can wander in there. Right. And so there's a little bit of that going on with Doge. What's going to be important once you get to that next phase, and you can think of that as like when Jensen like shows up with some robot and like Elon does his like Tesla Optimus thing. Well, that technology doesn't really work yet, but by 2028 it will. And what currently it won't just be like scaling out the data centers, but every significant energy consumer in every warehouse that has like a CNC machine in it that could have been mining Bitcoin, right? Um, it it will have like the AI Bitcoin CNC machiner that prints that knows how to keep working. It knows how to just infinitely, it's not like an ASIC that you figure out, oh, we found one person to send us an API query for some hash caches, it's 1997, and then you spin it up for 12 seconds and then you turn it off, right? That's like the entire industrial economy. It's like, well, we got an order for some widgets, and then like you turn the CNC machine on and like machine the parts, and then you like deliver it to the guy who's like 3 minutes down the road, right, in a truck. And the best people could come up with was 3D printers, and there's like one of the my guys, like he went to work at the New Zealand economy is very like globalized, like first world. So after working at the Magical Numbers company, actually, like a couple of people, like one of them went to work at the superconducting space propulsion company, and one of them went to work at the titanium 3D printing company, where they like 3D print parts that would otherwise, previously have been machined, but because New Zealand's such a small economy, but they need some like very bespoke widget thing, then they'll go 3D printed out of my titanium, right? Rather than like go so they can iterate that much more quickly. And then, well, one of the ideas that we have is like, well, what else should, like if we need to add value, if we need to make the price floor of the starter kit go up, well, maybe we'll just put the price up on the website proportional to a titanium 3D printed case with your Bitcoin thing around it that we put on it. So there's an open problem of not just like trying to keep it as commodity and pure as possible. So physically, aside from putting the best bits that we can figure out by the time that everybody demands that they take them off our hands, right? And there's not that demand for it at the moment. People are still buying in. There's that, so that's sort of like the stable lens of it, that you're really sort of like looking at as its base, how you view a Mac Mini today and how you value a Mac Mini today. Right now, people don't know how to value like a 2188 starter kit because it's completely undefined. It does give you the feeling of like, wow, I own a 2188 starter kit in New Zealand, which is a Mac Mini. So it constrains my search of what could a 2188 starter kit be to things that Mac Minis could potentially be. And, a computer is still relatively universal in the range and scope of the things that it can do. But if you understand that, like, well, hundreds of people are ordering these things, then not just like, are you exposed to certain like information from us, like on Twitter, but we also have like a direct relationship with you, which is also via the trust of the Apple brand, right? In the same way that, well, you can interact with our people on our social network without us needing to run a social network database and everything, an algorithm like Elon, just does that and we pay him for it. But there is the case where, like, imagine that we can't get Mac Minis, or like people really need them right now, or like how do we that people start to have a non-zero price for like what they would value a node, in our network, but that we may still be working on uh building that up to the point that is what we really want it. So there's a buffer that needs to be made. Potentially, we might have to go, okay, we're going to put a gold bar in the box, right? If the base price of that kit gets so speculative, right? So imagine like somebody comes and puts a $10 million order in and that I can't go buy $10 million of Apple things, or that's confusing or whatnot. Then maybe we have the Michael Saylor problem of like, where do we go store our $10 million while we're waiting for our Apple order to come through, right? And the if we can do that while containing it in the commodity, then that same idea that we started with in 2020 about how do you get a non-zero price for data? Well, a computer, if it can store any data in it. So if you have a bunch of computers and they're not, somebody isn't saying, hey, I'll buy that computer with something on it off of you, like imagine it's got Satoshi's private key. Well, then it's not the price of the computer, is it? It's the value of the private key, right? And the private key can sign a message. So if you had a computer that was signing a message to say it's a such and such Bitcoin wallet, then you're probably going to like try to get access to that thing, ideally legally, right? And the same psychology exists at this like physical Bitcoin level.
Okay, so
So
I have one last question because I know you got to get going. You ready? And it follows right where you were saying. I'm sorry for cutting you off. Were you about to say something?
I was just going to say that the same thing exists for this physical Bitcoin level. So if it's so not just like a tweet's worth of information, right? That maybe is worth like $2 or something, and then you have the problem of like dealing with the mass production of tweets problem. The mass production of a computer that helps you do what those 2028 people on Twitter do, right? That is much more stable and grounded. It's bounded. So it doesn't have the same computational complexity that like drowned me before. It helps to give you a way to buy into something speculative without the box, without the can of worms all being open and you dealing with looking directly at that before it's done, right? Now, if that hype got really big, which I don't expect at all, but logically in the exercise, this is like part of what to think about, is like, well, there might come a situation where the market really wants the buy-in price for a Mac Mini for a 2018 node to be $100,000, right? In which case, we would need to configure a suited, like there would be some shift in the understanding of what it is that would proportionally want that the capital that it would still do the same thing, but that the physical products that's representative of that price would be proportionate. So you have a lot of risk. Like if and all these AI tokens they have this sort of like net asset value sort of like speculative thing. So they'll hold some Solanas and then their thing will be like worth $20 million, but they'll only have 500,000 of Solanas, right? So they have this issue of like if that was happening to us and we don't have a token, so it doesn't. I just sell it at the raw asset value, and it's an asset. It's not a financial asset that's traded and speculative and has all this. It's a product that you're buying because it's going to come with our software on it, right? But without us going out there and like advertising potential, and actually that would reduce the value of it because if it's a computer it can do anything, and so it's really about the marketing exercise. And could you potentially just ship it at its 10.99 New Zealand dollar price? It's really an exercise about, hey, we just want to have the experience of buying a Mac Mini from you, right? And then the extra cost is this delay for when that actually gets shipped. Now, if people just bought Mac Minis from me and then I shipped them from New Zealand and then it lost me money, like for all the overheads, that wouldn't be a very good business. So we're in the business of this very sort of unique thing where only if you want to do that 2018 thing. Otherwise, go buy one from the Apple store, because that will also give you the physical product and you can do this exercise with everybody else too, right? So there is a chance in the same way that a MicroStrategy share is like $250,000 compared to a Bitcoin, right? What is that premium that they had? And obviously there is a premium there. Part of it is like the management. So it's like the key wallet thing that I was talking about with him before. I actually think his coins are managed by Coinbase.
Hmm.
But it's the accessibility of that from your pension fund in the US because you can't buy Bitcoins from your pension fund. So there is a suitable premium there and an actual service that they're delivering. And if he's every day that he gets on, he's like trying to explain it, right? Similar to this conversation, is that he has a product that he's selling where there is some premium and some work and some added value that he's putting into it, but he doesn't know what that value should be priced at, right? So he's just acting on this like short-term thing, which is like, yeah, but the Bitcoins are underpriced, right? Which is the subsidy thing of in general. But at some point, the price then that prediction becomes true, and now you have a dilemma, which is you have to sell your Bitcoins. And then you're just buying back in, which he does like, right? So his average cost of Bitcoins go up. Bitcoin miners are doing this now too. They've stopped building new capacity and they're just buying Bitcoins from the market. So there are no new large scale facilities that are being developed. And that's why I think that this Japanese money is coming. Um,
Okay.
but we have a little micro version of that, and that we don't it's not paid for by it's not a subsidy, right? So there's no speculative value like, hey, we can make X amount of dollars if we go and get a bunch of energy and borrow a bunch of money and then like go buy ASICs and go mine Bitcoins for a couple of years, right? There isn't any of that. The role that I'm also doing is like I'm also being a merchant. So like, great, there is now something that you can buy. You can buy a physical Bitcoin. And you could buy physical Bitcoins, remember, in like way back when. And that you could buy a coin
Cassatious.
thing. Yeah, yeah, but you couldn't
Cassatious
trust
coins.
them. You couldn't trust them. So there is this like once you move to this post-subsidy model where the information is much more valuable and starts to be, and if you know how to get at that with the blockchain, then it's the capabilities of the system, no different to how Jensen or how Larry Ellison or Elon are doing or Zuck are doing the calculations on like, well, how big of a model can I train on these particular chips, right? And the exact same conversation is happening with Nvidia chips that systems that are then no bigger than a Mac Mini, right? But actually, it's a M2 Mac Mini, so actually, they're still quite sizable. But there's also, actual uh, uh, people building Mac Mini clusters. A couple of years out of after we started doing it, and then like wink wink, didn't tell anybody about it, because it was like valuable information at the time. Now we're in a market which is like, hey, if we can coax and convince everybody to adopt this business model and move to this node type, then a lot of that speculative value and risk that's like overpriced in Nvidia. You see these huge queues of people going to the Nvidia GTC conference. Well, in 2028, they will be going to the like Bitmain Nvidia hybrid of the GPU AI ASIC thing, right? Which, in my view, is not going to look very different to a Mac Mini, right? Because it has these existing performance properties of what people are trying to get at when they do it in the data center. So that's this thing. There might be a case where the speculators uh, get too much of side information gained from us and they hear about the 21/8 thing again and they want to go and turn it into something. Um, in order for that not to turn into like sort of like the speculative vehicle that I had before, where we hire people and we go out and sort of like rationally try to do that like we're a Silicon Valley company, right? And I pivoted off that business model entirely onto the nodes business. Um, if that started coming back again, like first of all, hey, we did that business and nobody wanted it and we didn't get funded, we ran out of money, and so like we went off, so I'm doing this now instead, right? There is a potential that if that got too big, then I would need a way to not just have like the base thing, like think of it like the micro strategy, the Bitcoin part of the micro strategy, but if you had all the speculative risky capital and like some potential premium, which is that if I needed to sell, if I could only deal with as just me, like nodes in the hundreds, if suddenly everyone wants like 250,000, if I have if there's like 250,000 people that want to come and get it, I don't have the capacity to subsidize it to that extent, right? Because I sell all these kits at cost. They people pay for it in the time that they're willing to wait to, but you can a couple of, not too angry people, but some people that basically regretted their decision after 12 minutes, they're like, hey, I did that thing, but can you just give me a refund? And we just process that. So there's an exercise and being in the club of like holding on to all this potential energy, work on it collectively. At some point, ideally, it's just that people demand the thing and it's ready, and we can, and at that moment, it's like when the Bitcoin miners turn off because there's a blizzard going through Texas, and it's more profitable to sell electricity to people in Texas than it is to buy all the electricity and sell it to Bitcoin, right? Uh, if there is a speculative thing on this exercise, then we might have a risk of like needing to upgrade the computer, for example. And in my view, if that happened, it would dilute the core value proposition because the Mac Mini is already the best like performance per dollar per watt out of any product in the industry. And I did that calculation like on the M1s and M2s. And now we have the M4 out. So I think Nvidia has a chance that they could catch up and make something competitive by the next halving. And like by when the next halving comes along, I'll reassess it completely. Like hopefully there'll be a startup that makes this stuff like open and runs Linux and everything and not Mac OS and a bunch of like proprietary drivers. Um, but uh, but I'm making that commitment. We'll do that and we'll support that for Gen 1 of the system. And then when the second gen comes along, think of it like going from PS1 to PS2. Then we'll look at, well, is there something that is more Mac Mini than the Mac Mini, right? In terms of like in a suitable number of properties that it's better, like it's shrunk even more. Um, then yeah, if that's something that Microsoft and Qualcomm or the Intel or somebody do, I'll just do that analysis and that will just have taken all the mimetic power probably if it does it. But the other thing about Apple is that, they're a long-term, they're older than Bitcoin, right? Like they've been, Mac OS is older than Bitcoin. So there's a certain amount of like risk that you have to take into account for like, well, just because something might be shiny and new and competitive on some specs today doesn't mean that like it's not going to collapse in value after 5 minutes or that your grandma is going to know how to use it to sell her emails, to send her emails. So like that's the view that I take into it. It's like the most the best the most computer per dollar. And as part of that use case, that set of use cases is essentially, is it also the best thing to use to work on Bitcoin? And in my view today, like, yep, if you have Bitcoins and you spend your Bitcoins on buying an Apple Mac Mini, you will probably do fine. If you are somebody who is going to spend your Bitcoins like buying a really expensive top of the line 500 gig Apple computer, and we will also shill those on the timeline so that people can figure out, the investments that they want to make, versus just, saving your money, and then getting it at this level, then, yeah, there's a guy at the moment who's in Brazil. You may have seen some of these tweets the other day. Who he's apparently I think he's just taken delivery of 256 M4 Mac Minis. Um, and he but the rumor is that he's trying to build a cluster of 1024. So I'm following along on that, closely. There's some 2028 sort of adjacent aware people behind the scenes who I think have prodded him to do that. But he did the calculation himself for his own project, which is also sort of like AI and crypto adjacent, kind of like a blockchain thing. Like the blockchain guys, they also sort of, if you ever go ask the blockchain guys, what hardware should I be using for blockchain, they will just tell you a Mac Mini because it is it is this kind of like standard answer for these types of tasks. And otherwise, like when it's general purpose, you don't really know what it's going to be used for, right? So although there are specific recommendations you can make of the language models like very limited, like it's only one type of thing that you can use to run a GPU. And like, for example, $100,000 server with like no display ports is not going to be very good if you want to like then close down the AI program and then run Halo on it, like play a game on it, because suddenly, it's in some data center somewhere and you don't have Xbox controllers and you don't have screens that can be plugged into it and whatnot, right? And if you tried to move that to your house, it's going to use like 100 kilowatts.
All right, so let me ask you a question, just kind of bring things down for the audience. So essentially, 21E8 is a Bitcoin node. It's a Bitcoin meta node that applies to Bitcoin. Is that correct? And it's
What it
also,
might be, well, no, but in a practical sense, what it might, there's lots of different answers for like what like different forms it can take. The issue is that speculation, that was like what we solved with this physical Bitcoin concept, right? Now, if you think about these AI technologies in general, it's not just about like what is an AI model and a chatbot. Like chatbots are not that exciting. So if I told you it's a chatbot, which there's a demo of me on YouTube from like 2020 showing like here's our search tool, right? We didn't ship that because like the technology, whether it's what we're doing or whether it's or these other Gen AI companies do, they know that like it has this unbounded potential to be anything and everything in lots of different ways, right? And I'm not in that business anymore of build some big complicated like software platform where you could do that. Like that's expensive and you need some upfront money to play that game. So I'm not playing that game now. What I am playing is like I think that that game is going to move to a something that looks a lot more like a Mac Mini as a platform. And I think that there are some sort of things that we kind of invented or were the first ones to play with. Like what part of this is things to do with the Mac Mini, but part of it is also like the affiliate badges. And if you go on Twitter now, you will see several different companies that are in the Mac Mini AI business and they use affiliate badges. And several of them are going, hey, maybe I can do some Solana pump fund agent things for my revenue model, right? And that right now they won't call that the computational data market because the speculative capital and the money is paying people to say AI agents, right?
right.
Now, if they said 21E8 and computational data markets, then they would find very quickly that they suddenly know more about what's going on and they make better decisions and they build their products along that way. And so there's several like 21E8 adjacent companies that are all tackling that speculative problem on a small scale, right? And so I'll be looking to can some of those projects be suitable enough, like when the Xbox came out? Well, or Steam launched, then you had Halo as a day one launch title, or you had Half-Life 2, ship on alongside Steam, right? And so I'm doing the exercise of making the starter kit box that is a magical box that says 21E8 on it. And so they're like, yeah, it's really hard for other people to figure out how to put Bitcoin and AI into a box that I could plausibly imagine that could be sold at Best Buy. We would really like to have 2028 starter kit boxes that you buy at Best Buy, but we would also like to have it say Chloe 2028 and Goth 600 and everything next to it, right? And it costs lots of money, and the AI technology still isn't there yet to make like an AI video game. But Elon, like, if you learn to read the announcements and see what's going on, you can see that there's a lot of that's coming down the pipeline. It's also coming from Nvidia. They have been saying the same sort of thing about that every game frame is going to be generated instead of rendered, in the in about 5 years, about 4 or 5 years,
So it's
and
not
you can
like I
see
could
that with their
just,
chips now.
so it's not like we could just go buy Mac Minis and install the software of 21E8 ourselves.
For the speculative exercise of like the Mac Mini unit of account, you can do that. If that's a lot of work and and you'd rather just like I do that, hold on to that for you and put them in a pile, then I'll also, I'll also do that. So you can actually approach that like purely from that on that speculative basis. Um, and it's a fun like entertainment thing of like think about your Mac Mini and now you don't need to scroll on Twitter all day. because you can just go anywhere and like think about a Mac Mini, like, turning around in your head, and like that's quite entertaining. So that's really efficient. But I'm punished anytime like we don't make any money, right? Because we sell the node at cost. And the value proposition is better if you don't need like the less that you need as an overhead. So
Right.
hopefully I don't need to open the boxes at all to pre-configure anything. I can just put like an SD card in there or a Bitcoin like transaction ID of some zip file or something else, but it needs to have everything in there for you to do what we were doing in the last cycle, right? Which is this information creation concept. And so right now I'm sort of in like post-production on that, try to figure out how to continue like anything that isn't needed, it can be thrown out and deleted, and then continue to grind it down until it, like fits on a nice little like 8 GB SD card. And then you can confidently go, okay, cool, like let's go create 10 million of these, right? But ideally oh, did we lose you?
Oh shit. I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Your camera just disappeared. I guess it's a good thing for the
Oh,
end of the chat.
I guess
Yeah,
so. Yeah. Oh, good.
we'll have figured out.
I never
Ideally,
plugged
we'll have
in my
figured out.
camera, so it was running on battery. My bad. So I could turn it on in 1 second. Sorry.
That's okay. It's quite funny.
Yeah, but we could definitely start wrapping up. You know what? I really love this because from just as a Bitcoiner who fell in love with Bitcoin's computational power, um, I'm someone who finds a lot of value in this, man. Like I really do. And it's for the first time in my life that I see it actually happening and taking place in a very real way, in a new way, in a way that is better than I had ever hoped for, where like this is something like can you see me now? Can you hear me
Yep.
well? Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
To be completely honest, Mark, like I've been one of those people I've probably have followed you the closest throughout the years, and yet it's been very hard for me to really wrap my head around this. So I really want to thank you for your time, and believe me, I'm starting to really get the picture. I'm really starting to get the picture now. Now I'm at the position where as soon as I'm off this call, I'm gonna. Last time I checked, the Mac Minis were out of sale. And there's a line, there's a message that said we're out of stock. Can I go buy one right now?
So what I'm doing is like every week I will call up the PC shop and they send me 5 computers and I take on the risk of like making that available. Because before last year, what I was doing is people were ordering them and then after they send me the money and then Stripe sends me the money, then I would go and get the computers. All right. So I'm sort of trying to do the job of be really good, like, run the inventory and like immediately be able to have the thing on its a moment notice. So I will go acquire like some nodes in our risk tolerance, add some nodes, put them on the website, keep track of how many days they take to ship. Because this is one of the key indicators for Nvidia at the moment is it something like 68 days for inventory that they have on hand to be shipped to customer, right? And
Nice.
that's like with an argument, like a extremely highly overpriced, like that's at the speculative thing that they're supposedly saying, like, there's enormous infinite demand and they're all out of stock. Well, if they're all out of stock, why is it taking 68 days to move the inventory, right? So
Hmm.
my goal is for us to not just have this sort of like micro strategy thing of not having the execution risk of creating and producing the product, but also marketing it and producing it, right? And like doing all the software and things, de-risk the hardware, right? And to the extent that there might I
I'm still
lost
here.
your
I'm still here. I'm
camera
still
again.
here.
I'll just finish up and we can
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
yeah, to the extent that there might technically need to be some software on there that goes in the box that like to nail the experience, like I have the capacity to do that. But we're making the bet either that at the moment, like if we put some premium, so if I charge like $1,200, except a Mac Mini is less, then it wouldn't have the same sort of effect. Um, but yeah, it would like limit the value that comes out of the collective like network and exercise from doing it. If we figure out how to just make all that work, like at the moment, if you just get a Mac Mini and you install X on it, and then you can see our people, so you don't, yeah, like a computer is or iPhone or whatever is the 2018 starter kit, right? So that's all that's kind of needed at this level of it. If suddenly everybody that has one of those badges that you see on the internet, they go to start, doing something, then what I'm trying to do is like, form a consensus on, hey, everybody just like use the Mac Mini as the node target, so that some guy doesn't come and like add something that like BSV had this problem where in 2020, most of the node software was still for running on servers. And so people were shutting down their nodes, and they wouldn't have had that problem if they ran on like, on a desktop PC as much.
Right on. No, this is amazing.
If you had a Mac
Um,
Mini, then you probably wouldn't have the camera problem so much.
there you go.
It doesn't even have a camera, so you just like come on the audio.
Yeah, correct. So I'm just blown away, and I want to thank you for your time. So this is something that I find so important, that what I'm gonna do, Mark, is that I'm gonna watch this over and over again, because you it seems like you're like a volcano erupting of information, of ideas, of like really consolidating what we need most in bringing to life the bit aspect of Bitcoin. So I'm gonna digest everything. I'm gonna take down some questions. I'm gonna really go get. I'm gonna get some questions out of this whole conversation, and I would like to do a part two with you. It could be in a month from now, 2 months from now, but I really want to keep the momentum going. I understand that you're gonna be having a Twitter space tomorrow, right? So
There's some stuff around the moment. Things don't change that rapidly. Hasn't really changed like in 12 months. It's now sort of about the time that to sort of kind of like going on 12 months since we started this, like 11 months, that you can now start understanding what's going on.
mhm.
And I've done a few interviews over the years, and you can sort of track them a bit. So
Yeah,
I would go and write down some questions, pick somebody else with that badge on Twitter, and ask them some questions. I
yeah.
think that would be quite interesting. And then like, let's talk in like 12 or 18 months.
There you go. Yeah. So what I'm gonna ask everyone watching this video, is to write down questions. And at the beginning of this video, I'm going to I'm gonna put a message at the beginning of this video saying, this topic is pretty dense. If you have any questions for Mark for an upcoming video, make sure you ask questions below. Just feel free. Don't be bashful. Ask questions. Just ask questions on the comments below. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you're doing for Bitcoin, for the entire space. And where can people find you? Where can people learn more about what 21E8 is?
Go to apple.com/Mac Mini, and then, you can find me there.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for your time, Mark. Peace, love, anarchy. Ciao.
Cheers.
Now we are dealing with a possible world war. Some will say we are already in a world war. My condolences and prayers go out to everyone suffering under tyranny. It really sucks. I'm really sorry. But it seems as if people are starting to wake up regarding crypto more and more each day. And so it's in the description right here to read, where we give our secret sauce and what we teach our subscribers, because things are just that bad. Everyone needs this information. People need to know about sound cryptocurrencies that are actually private by default, and to know how to properly use crypto.